Imagine lying in bed at night, your body tired but your mind racing, thoughts swirling like a storm, worries about tomorrow, regrets from the past, that never-ending to-do list haunting you like background noise. Be honest. How many nights have you closed your eyes, hoping for peace, only to stay wide awake, trapped in your own thoughts? Now imagine something different. Imagine falling asleep, not with stress, but with a deep sense of calm. Imagine letting go of everything you can't control and drifting into rest with a heart that is light, a mind that is quiet, and a spirit that finally feels free. The truth is, the way you fall asleep shapes how you wake up. If you fall asleep in fear, in tension, in resistance, you carry that into the next day. But if you fall asleep in surrender, in peace, in acceptance, you wake up grounded, rested, and ready to meet life as it is. Tonight, you're going to discover the teachings that have helped millions find peace, even in the middle of chaos. These aren't just words from ancient texts. They are living truths, whispered by monks, practiced by seekers, and waiting for you to experience them. So, get comfortable, breathe deeply, and let yourself listen with your whole heart. These Buddhist teachings on surrender and acceptance might be exactly what your soul has been needing. Before we begin, I want you to make a promise, not to me, but to yourself. Whisper it in your mind or write it in the comments. Starting tonight, I choose peace. I surrender. I accept. Say it again. Let it sink in, because tonight, you're not just going to fall asleep, you're going to let go. There's a strange moment, often just before sleep, when you realize how little is actually in your hands. You feel it in your chest, that quiet ache of trying so hard, trying to be in control, to fix everything, to hold it all together. Maybe it's the argument that keeps replaying in your mind. Maybe it's the fear that something will go wrong tomorrow. Or maybe it's just the pressure of being someone who's always expected to have the answers. But deep down, you know something isn't working. The grip is too tight, the worry too constant, and peace, it feels like a distant memory. There is a reason you're here tonight, not just to sleep, but to understand something that most people go their entire lives avoiding: the truth that you were never meant to carry it all. That your need for control is the very thing standing between you and the calm you long for. And the good news? Buddhism doesn't just teach you to let go. It shows you how to do it in a way that heals something deeper, the root of your suffering. To begin, we need to go to the heart of one of Buddhism's most important teachings, shunyata, often translated as emptiness. But don't let that word scare you. Emptiness is not about being hollow or meaningless. It's not depression. It's not numbness. It's something else, something far more beautiful. Emptiness is the understanding that everything you're trying to hold on to, your identity, your stories, your expectations, your fears, are not as solid as they seem. In fact, they're always changing, always moving, always dependent on something else. And here's the truth no one tells you. The things we try to control the most are the things that hurt us when we lose them. That's not because life is cruel, it's because we're clinging to illusions. Think of the way we attach ourselves to outcomes. We plan everything, hoping things will turn out the way we pictured in our minds. And when they don't, we feel betrayed. But what if that betrayal isn't coming from the world, but from our own refusal to accept how things actually are? This is where surrender becomes powerful. Not the kind of surrender that means giving up, no. This is the surrender that opens space inside you. The kind that says, I don't need to control everything to be at peace. This kind of letting go isn't weakness, it's wisdom. In Buddhist teachings, clinging is seen as one of the main roots of suffering. Why? Because everything changes. Your health, your relationships, your status, even your beliefs. And yet, we cling. We build our sense of self around things that are not stable. When they shift, as they always will, we feel like we're losing ourselves. But we're not. We're only losing the mask we thought was our face. Shunyata helps us see that there is nothing permanent to cling to, not because life is empty in a sad way, but because it's open, fluid, free. When you understand this, control starts to feel less like safety and more like a cage, a self-imposed one. We often use control to try to protect ourselves from pain. If I can just plan every step, if I can make sure this person stays, if I can never fail, then I won't hurt. But that logic never works. Pain is part of life. Avoiding it only creates more suffering. So what's the alternative? It's presence. It's acceptance. It's letting go of the idea that you must manage life like a business transaction and instead stepping into life as a flowing, unpredictable experience. When you accept that you can't control every outcome, you begin to breathe again. You start to loosen your grip. And in that loosened state, something extraordinary happens. You become more alive, not more passive, more awake. Control gives the illusion of safety, but it actually cuts you off from the deeper experience of trust. Not blind faith, but a grounded trust in the nature of things, that everything is impermanent, that emotions rise and fall, that people will come and go, and that you are still okay. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you start loving without possession, working without obsession, living without needing to predict the ending. It means you stop expecting life to obey your plans, and instead you meet life as it comes, with strength, with softness, with curiosity. In Zen, there's a phrase, let go or be dragged. It's not a threat, it's an observation. If you hold too tightly to something that's already moving, you get pulled, you suffer. But when you let go, you can walk freely, with both hands open. Control often comes from fear of loss, of rejection, of failure. But when you look closely at those fears, you'll notice something surprising. They all come from trying to protect something that was never meant to last. You're not failing by letting it go. You're growing. You might be wondering, but if I don't control things, won't everything fall apart? The truth is, sometimes things do fall apart, and still life continues. Still you learn. Still you heal. Sometimes the falling apart is the beginning of something better, something you couldn't have planned if you tried. Buddhism doesn't promise a life without pain. What it offers is freedom within the pain. Freedom from the story that says, this shouldn't be happening. Freedom from the belief that you need everything to go your way to be okay. That freedom is only possible when you let go of control, not because you failed, but because you finally understood that control was never real in the first place. Letting go doesn't mean abandoning your responsibilities. It means doing what you can with love and care and then releasing the outcome. This is hard. It takes courage, but the reward is something no plan, no strategy, no control could ever give you. Peace. That peace grows each time you face something uncertain and say, "I don't know what will happen, and I'm okay with that." It grows each time you notice yourself trying to force an answer, and instead you breathe, you pause, you wait, you let life speak first. In mindfulness practice, this surrender is not dramatic. It's subtle. It's the decision to listen instead of react, to observe instead of control, to trust instead of grip. And over time, this becomes your new way of being. Control is often linked with identity. I'm someone who gets things done. I'm the one people count on. I'm the strong one. But these identities, while helpful in small ways, become painful when we believe they are us. Because then, when life challenges them, we feel attacked. But when you see them for what they are, temporary roles, you can hold them more lightly. You can say, "That was me in one moment, but I'm not only that." Emptiness, in this sense, isn't a loss of self. It's the freedom to be more than one fixed self. It's the space to evolve, to respond, to let go of who you were yesterday and become someone new today. This flexibility is what real peace looks like. Not perfection, not control, but openness. Sometimes surrender shows up as tears you didn't expect, or laughter that breaks through a heavy moment, or silence that no longer feels empty, but safe. These are signs that you're not clinging anymore. You're allowing. Letting go doesn't mean you'll never care again. It means you care without needing things to be a certain way. It means you show up fully and then you release the results. This is the core of Buddhist wisdom, non-attachment. Not because life is bad, but because life is too precious to hold on to too tightly. There's an old metaphor in Buddhism. Imagine holding a handful of sand. If you grip it too tightly, the grains slip through your fingers. But if you hold it gently, the sand stays. That's what surrender is. A gentle, respectful way of holding life. So tonight, let your mind soften. Let your thoughts pass like clouds. Let the world spin without your control. It always has. And still, you are here, breathing, alive. Let go of the need to figure it all out. Let go of needing to be right, to be perfect, to be in charge. None of that is required for peace. Peace asks only one thing of you, that you release the illusion that you are alone in holding the universe together. You don't need to carry the weight of every decision, every outcome, every person's approval. What if your only job tonight is to rest, to release, to remember that the deepest wisdom doesn't always come through effort, it comes through stillness. There is great strength in knowing when to act and when to step back. Great strength in being soft. Great strength in choosing surrender not as defeat, but as the most honest response to life's complexity. And here, in this quiet moment, you already know. It's okay to let go. It's safe. Because what you release makes room for something new. Something you don't have to control. Something you can simply receive. Let that be your final thought before sleep takes you. Not a to-do list, not a replay of everything that went wrong. But this, letting go, is not the end. It is the beginning of peace. And peace, real peace, always starts inside you. You've just felt it, that quiet moment of release where the tight grip begins to loosen, and for once, control doesn't feel like the goal anymore. But even after we let go, there's often a new question waiting underneath. Why did this happen at all? When things don't go our way, when life doesn't feel fair, when pain arrives uninvited, that question haunts us. Not because we want revenge, but because we want understanding. We want to believe that somewhere, somehow, there is a sense of order, a reason, a balance. That longing for fairness is natural. We've been taught from childhood that good actions lead to good outcomes and bad ones get punished. But life rarely plays by those simple rules. Good people suffer, dishonest people rise, pain shows up without a warning, and despite our best efforts, things often fall apart. It's this disconnect between effort and result that creates resistance inside us. This is where the Buddhist concept of karma steps in, not to punish, not to reward, but to explain. Karma, in its original and deeper meaning, is not a cosmic scoreboard keeping track of sins and virtues. It is cause and effect, action and consequence, unfolding with precision but without bias. Every thought, word, and deed sets something in motion. But what that something becomes is not always linear, not always visible, and not always immediate. Karma does not promise fairness in the way the human mind wants it. Instead, it offers continuity, it offers understanding, and ultimately, it offers liberation from the need to judge every outcome. The trap many people fall into is seeing karma as instant justice, a kind of spiritual policing system. But this creates more suffering, because life often doesn't deliver consequences on our timeline. When you live with the expectation that karma means immediate fairness, you will keep getting disappointed. But when you shift that mindset and begin to see karma as movement, not moral math, you begin to trust something deeper. Acceptance begins when you stop demanding that life should match your ideas of fairness. That doesn't mean you stop caring about justice or truth. It means you let go of the expectation that the world owes you specific results. You live with clarity, not entitlement. You understand that everything unfolding right now is connected to conditions, some from the past, some from lifetimes ago, many outside your control. This might sound cold at first, but it is incredibly freeing. Because once you stop believing that everything must be fair, you stop fighting with reality. You stop thinking, this shouldn't be happening, and instead ask, what is this here to teach me? That shift, small in words, massive in practice, is the doorway to peace. The karmic view invites you to stop clinging to your story of victimhood or superiority. Both are attachments. Whether you believe you're always the one being wronged or always the one doing right, you are still holding on to identity in a way that creates resistance. Karma doesn't label you, it simply responds. You act with intention and the ripple spreads, sometimes softly, sometimes like a wave. This is why radical acceptance is possible. Because once you understand that life is a web of causes and conditions, you stop personalizing every pain. You stop thinking, life is against me. You start to see that life is responding to life, and you are one part of that great unfolding, not in control of it all, not the center of the universe, but also not helpless, because karma means your actions matter, even if you can't always see how. In this way, karma teaches accountability without shame. You realize that what you do, think, and say matters. Not because someone is watching, but because every intention becomes part of the larger flow of reality. Your kindness shifts energy. Your anger leaves a mark. Your generosity builds invisible bridges. But you do not get to control how these things return to you. And that is the part that requires maturity. Surrender. It's common to ask, but what about the people who hurt others and never seem to suffer? This is where Buddhist wisdom gently reminds us, you cannot see the full picture. What appears as reward might be its own trap. What seems like success might be hollow inside, and what you cannot see inside their heart, their future, their past, contains more than you can imagine. This doesn't mean turning away from injustice, but it means responding without hatred, without poison in your heart, because hatred only binds you to the very pain you want to escape. Karma isn't asking you to be passive. It's asking you to respond from clarity, not reaction. From compassion, not vengeance. When you understand karma this way, forgiveness becomes easier. Not because what happened was okay, but because you no longer need repayment. You don't need the scales to balance in your lifetime. You trust that everything unfolds as it must. And in that trust, you stop leaking energy into resentment. You let go, not for them, for you. And then there's the other side of the coin, self-forgiveness. Some of the hardest karma to face is your own. The mistakes you made, the people you hurt, the chances you missed. Karma doesn't erase the past, but it gives you something better, the power to respond differently now. Every moment is a turning point. Every breath is a chance to plant a new seed. But this is where it gets even deeper. Buddhism teaches that karma doesn't just come from action, it comes from intention. What's happening inside you is shaping your path just as much as what happens outside. If you speak kindly, but think with judgment, that thought is still shaping energy. If you help others, but do it to feel superior, that craving still plants a seed. So the work becomes subtle. You begin to observe your motivations, not to punish yourself, but to purify your mind. This is why meditation is so central. It helps you see what's really moving underneath your habits. It teaches you to stop acting from unconscious reaction and start acting from conscious clarity. The more you watch your mind, the more you understand karma, not just as a philosophy, but as something alive within you. You begin to sense how every action echoes, and with that awareness comes gentleness. You speak slower, you choose your responses, you begin to value stillness more than noise. And yet, there will be moments when you do everything right and still suffer. When you act with kindness and still face rejection. When you're honest and still misunderstood. That's when karma challenges you to look deeper. Because sometimes your suffering isn't about this moment, it's about something far older. A pattern that needs to unwind. A habit that needs to break. A lesson that needs time. When you stop expecting results to match your actions perfectly, you gain a new kind of power. You stop being a transaction. You start being a presence. You act from integrity because that's who you are, not because of what you'll get. This is radical because it removes the If I do this, then I deserve that model, and replaces it with, I do this because it's right, even if no one sees it, even if nothing changes, even if the only result is peace in my own heart. And what you'll find over time is that this kind of peace lasts longer than the satisfaction of getting what you wanted. It's quieter, but deeper, and it holds up when life doesn't. When you accept karma fully, you begin to trust life more. You stop needing to force everything. You let others live their journeys, even when you disagree with them. You let yourself learn from pain rather than fight it. You start saying, this is hard, but it's part of the path, instead of, this shouldn't be happening. That phrase, part of the path, becomes a soft mantra. It doesn't explain away your hurt. It doesn't justify everything. But it reminds you that this moment is not the whole story. It reminds you that everything is evolving, and that some of the most powerful awakenings come through the fire of things not going your way. Acceptance doesn't mean liking everything. It means choosing peace anyway. It means looking at your current situation and saying, this is what is, and I will meet it with clarity, not control. In this way, karma doesn't just explain life. It teaches you how to live, how to walk through uncertainty without fear, how to meet joy without gripping it, how to meet sorrow without drowning in it. Karma is not punishment, it's opportunity. Every moment is a chance to change direction, not by controlling the outcome, but by shifting the intention. And eventually, something beautiful happens. You begin to notice a quiet confidence growing in you, the kind that doesn't come from success or approval, but from alignment. You start to act from your center. You stop reacting to every push and pull around you. You realize that peace isn't found in fairness. Peace is found in alignment with truth. This is the essence of Buddhist acceptance, not passive endurance, not cold detachment, but grounded clarity, a willingness to face life as it is, to act from a clean heart, and to release the results. That's what karma really teaches. Not fear of consequence, but respect for connection. Not perfection, but presence. Not fairness, but flow. So tonight, let yourself rest in that truth. Let the need for everything to make sense fall away. Let the need for balance, for revenge, for rewards, dissolve. Trust that what matters most is not how things unfold, but how you meet them. Karma doesn't forget, but it also doesn't rush. Let your life be shaped by patience, by grace, by steady choices. Let yourself sleep tonight, not as someone waiting for the world to be fair, but as someone who knows they are free. Free to forgive, free to start again, free to love without guarantees, and above all, free to live this life, not as a game to be won, but as a path to be walked, one conscious step at a time. There comes a point in the practice, not dramatic, not loud, when the question quietly shifts. It's no longer what caused this to happen, but who is it happening to? You start to notice that behind every moment of resistance, every disappointment, every craving, there's a thread, and that thread leads to one idea: me, my story, my pain, my image, my identity. It's subtle, but it's always there. This need to define yourself, defend yourself, be someone in a world that doesn't stop changing. But what if that someone you keep protecting was never solid to begin with? all the letting go of control, all the surrender to karma, all the radical acceptance we've explored so far, it all leads here, to the deepest letting go of all, surrendering the self. Buddhist teachings offer a word for this insight. Anatta, often translated as non-self. It doesn't mean you don't exist. It means the thing you call yourself is not fixed, not separate, not independent. The mind tries to hold on to identity like a stone, unchanging, reliable. But in truth, it's more like a river, always moving, always shaped by conditions. That's why we suffer so deeply when the ego is challenged, when someone criticizes us, when we fail, when we're ignored, when our role in the world shifts. We've built our sense of self around a fragile structure of thoughts, memories, and roles. And when one piece moves, the whole thing feels like it might collapse. But Buddhism points to something extraordinary. The collapse is not the problem. The clinging to what's collapsing, that's the suffering. We suffer not because we are losing ourselves, but because we thought the self was something we could keep. Anatta teaches that what we think of as me is actually a process, a collection of sensations, thoughts, preferences, fears, hopes, and memories, all temporary, all interdependent. There is no central controller inside you, no fixed identity steering the wheel, just a flow of consciousness, reacting and responding, conditioned by causes you may never fully see. At first, this can sound frightening. If I am not who I think I am, then who am I? But the beauty of this insight is that it doesn't lead to emptiness in the way the ego fears. It leads to freedom, because when there is no solid self to protect, there is nothing to defend. When there is no fixed identity to uphold, there is space to breathe, to feel, to be. This isn't about erasing personality or becoming passive. It's about no longer being trapped by the story. You can still feel, think, act, speak, but you do it from presence, not performance, from awareness, not habit. Most people don't realize how much energy goes into holding up the self, into being the strong one, the smart one, the responsible one, the funny one, the broken one. Whatever your version is, these roles become cages, and even the comfortable ones exhaust you, because they all require constant maintenance. The insight of Anatta lets you put it all down, not because you've figured out a better identity, but because you've finally seen through the illusion that one was ever required. This shift begins not through theory, but through observation. When you meditate, you start to see that thoughts arise on their own. Emotions come and go. Preferences shift. Reactions change. You don't choose most of it. You witness it. And when you stop claiming each thought as mine, a new kind of clarity appears. The mind still moves, but you're no longer inside the storm. You're aware of it, but not consumed by it. This is where suffering begins to transform, because suffering, at its core, is personal, not just in content, but in tone. Why is this happening to me? But when the me becomes less solid, suffering has less of a grip. You still feel pain, but it passes through more easily. There's less resistance, less identity wrapped up in it. You stop narrating every discomfort as a personal attack. And what a relief that is. This doesn't mean becoming cold or indifferent. In fact, the opposite is true. When the self softens, empathy expands. Because when you're not trapped in your own identity, you start to see others more clearly. You see their pain not as separate, but as part of the same human experience. The walls between me and you begin to dissolve, and with that comes compassion, not as a performance, but as a natural response. Anatta is not an abstract philosophy. It's a living experience, and it starts with questions. What happens when I don't believe this thought? What am I defending right now, and why? What part of me feels threatened? And if I stop feeding that part, what remains? The process is not about deleting yourself. It's about realizing that who you are is not limited to any single story, role, or emotion. You begin to see that the awareness behind your thoughts is spacious. It can hold joy, grief, doubt, peace, all of it, without clinging to any of it. In this space, the need to be right starts to fall away. So does the need to be seen in a certain way. The craving to prove something softens. You don't lose your voice. You lose your need to yell. You don't lose your value. You lose your need to be validated. This kind of surrender is different from resignation. You don't disappear into nothingness. You appear more fully, because you're no longer filtered through a narrow idea of who you're supposed to be. You become available to the moment without the baggage of identity shaping every interaction. Think of how many decisions are made out of fear of losing an identity. Staying in a job, in a relationship, in a belief system, not because it feels true, but because without it, you don't know who you are. Anatta gives you permission to not know, to step into the unknown without panic, to live without being defined by the past. This opens the door to authenticity, not as a performance of being yourself, but as a moment-to-moment alignment with what is true. You stop asking, "What should someone like me do?" and start asking, "What feels clear right now, without fear, without ego?" And then something even more surprising happens. Peace becomes natural. Not because life is easier, but because you're no longer fighting to be someone. You're not caught in the game of proving your worth or defending your opinions. You're not dragged around by pride or insecurity. That doesn't mean the ego disappears overnight. It will still rise, still whisper, still want credit, recognition, control, but you start to see it as a visitor, not the host, a movement in the mind, not the mind itself. And that awareness gives you choice. You start to smile at your ego's drama instead of falling into it. You recognize your triggers and say, that's where I'm still attached. Not with judgment, with kindness, with curiosity, with courage. This is the liberation Anatta offers, the ability to meet life with openness because there is no fixed identity to protect. You become a mirror, able to reflect the world without distortion. You become, like the sky, able to hold every weather pattern without needing to change it. And the benefits ripple outward. Conflict loses its heat, because most conflict comes from ego, from needing to win, to be right, to not look weak. But when the self is not solid, those needs lose urgency. You can speak truth without domination. You can listen without defensiveness. Relationships deepen because there's less performance, more presence, more room for others to be who they are without threatening who you are. Because when there is no fixed you, there is more space for love. Even your goals shift, not because you stop caring, but because you stop chasing them to prove something. You act from alignment, not lack. You stop trying to become someone. you realize you already are. And at the deepest level, you begin to taste what freedom really is. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to not be defined by anything. The freedom to rest in awareness itself, knowing that you are not your thoughts, not your roles, not your past. You are the presence that holds it all. This insight doesn't make life perfect, but it makes it lighter, simpler, clearer. You stop being dragged by stories that never served you. You begin to meet yourself and the world with a kind of quiet humility. I don't know exactly who I am, and that's okay. Let that be your resting place tonight. Not a name, not a label, not an identity. Just presence, just awareness, just breath. You don't need to hold yourself together tonight. You don't need to know who you are tomorrow. Let the thoughts drift. Let the stories pass. There is nothing to prove, nothing to protect. Just this breath, just this peace. Surrender the self, not because you are disappearing, but because you are becoming vast, spacious, free. And in that freedom, everything changes. Even after surrendering the idea of a fixed self, there's still a lingering question. What now? If there is no permanent me to protect, if life cannot be controlled, if karma unfolds beyond our timeline, then how should we live? How do we walk forward without drifting into apathy or falling back into craving? The answer isn't found in retreating from life. It's found in walking a path that avoids extremes, a path known in Buddhism as the middle way. This way of living does not mean mediocrity or indecision. It is not about staying in the middle out of fear of commitment. It is the art of balance, an intentional path that moves between the sharp edges of indulgence and denial, between effort and surrender, between doing and being. This is where the wisdom of letting go becomes practical, grounded, and real. The middle way starts by recognizing that extremes create suffering. When you cling too tightly to goals, identities, or desires, you create tension. When you reject life, numb yourself, or withdraw completely, you miss the lessons hidden in the unfolding of each moment. The middle way is neither escape nor obsession. It is full participation, free from fixation. This teaching began with the Buddha himself, who lived both extremes before awakening. He was once a prince surrounded by luxury and pleasure, then a wandering ascetic who nearly died from self-denial. What he discovered in the quiet space between these two extremes became the foundation of the path. The insight that freedom doesn't come from controlling everything or from abandoning everything. It comes from walking with awareness, step by step, through the middle. In practice, this balance shows up in subtle ways. It means meditating with presence, not force. It means setting goals without measuring your worth by their outcome. It means caring deeply without becoming attached to how things turn out. And it means resting when you're tired, not out of laziness, but out of respect for your own limits. Too often, people think surrender means doing nothing. They confuse non-attachment with disinterest. But the middle way teaches something richer, that we can engage fully with life without being ruled by it. You can work hard with love and discipline, but without letting success or failure define you. You can love others without making them responsible for your happiness. You can show up every day with energy and focus, but let go of the need for everything to unfold according to your plan. This is not passive living. It is dynamic, present, and wise, because it takes great awareness to know when to act and when to step back, when to speak and when to stay silent, when to move forward and when to rest. These decisions are not formulaic. They arise from moment-to-moment clarity. The middle way is also the path of discernment. Not everything that looks like surrender is surrender. Sometimes giving up is rooted in avoidance. Sometimes discipline is actually just disguised control. The mind can be tricky. That's why Buddhist practice emphasizes mindfulness, not as a tool to manipulate experience, but as a mirror to see things clearly. To live this balance, we begin by noticing our tendencies. Some of us push too hard. We grasp, strive, and attach our worth to doing. Others avoid discomfort. We retreat, hide, and tell ourselves we are surrendering, when really we are protecting ourselves from feeling. The middle way invites you to meet both tendencies with kindness and honesty. To ask, what is this moment asking from me? Not what my habit says, but what wisdom says. There is strength in this softness. There is clarity in this calm. When you are no longer pulled to extremes, you begin to feel steady, anchored. You stop living in reaction and start living in response. Not reacting out of fear, ego, or craving, but responding from a grounded place within. This balanced way of being brings greater clarity in relationships as well. It allows you to love without losing yourself, to give without resentment, to listen without defensiveness. Because you are no longer approaching people with hidden expectations, you are offering what is real and letting go of what you cannot control. Even in spiritual practice, this balance is essential. Some people become attached to enlightenment as a goal, and they chase it with the same urgency they once chased material success. Others let go of discipline entirely and float in a fog of vague acceptance. But true practice lives in the middle. It is consistent, kind, devoted, and alive. It has structure, but not rigidity. It has surrender, but not avoidance. You learn to practice not for the sake of becoming someone, but to return again and again to this present moment, to sharpen awareness, to soften resistance, to see life as it is and respond with wisdom. This is the middle way in action. There is a gentleness in this path that surprises many people. It is not about pushing yourself into transformation. It is about removing what blocks your natural clarity. And often, those blocks are built from extremes, trying too hard, giving up too quickly, clinging to ideas, rejecting discomfort. When you walk the middle way, you discover that effort itself changes. It becomes sustainable. It becomes joyful. Because it's no longer about striving for an identity or escaping from fear. It's about showing up in each moment, fully present, fully human. Letting go then becomes a natural part of life, not a grand gesture, but a quiet, continual release. You let go of needing everything to make sense, of needing others to see you a certain way, of needing to always feel in control. And in that letting go, your effort becomes pure, not entangled in outcome, but rooted in love and clarity. The beauty of this path is that it honors your full experience. It doesn't ask you to reject pleasure, but to hold it lightly. It doesn't demand you embrace pain, but to meet it without fear. It doesn't teach detachment as coldness, but as space for real connection. Even in the hardest moments, the middle way provides a way forward. When grief feels overwhelming, it teaches you to feel fully without drowning. When joy feels fleeting, it teaches you to enjoy without clinging. When you are lost, it teaches you to pause, breathe, and trust. The next step will appear when it's time. This path invites you to slow down, not to stop living, but to stop rushing past your life. It asks you to listen to your inner life as carefully as you listen to the world, to be honest with yourself about what hurts, what helps, what heals. As you continue to walk this balanced path, you start to notice a different kind of peace. One that doesn't depend on everything being perfect. One that lives in the space between effort and release, between discipline and grace, between knowing and not knowing. That space is sacred. It's where you stop needing answers to feel safe, where you stop measuring yourself by how much you accomplish, where you no longer chase after the next moment, because this one is enough. In that space, you begin to understand that surrender does not mean you're giving up. It means you're stepping into alignment. That effort doesn't mean control. It means conscious, loving participation in the unfolding of life. This understanding transforms everything. Your breath becomes more steady. Your thoughts become less loud. Your choices become more thoughtful. Your presence deepens, not because you're trying harder, but because you're no longer caught in the extremes of trying or giving up. The middle way is not a destination. It's a rhythm, a dance, a relationship with life. It evolves as you evolve. It asks for your attention, your curiosity, your patience. It rewards you not with guarantees, but with depth, with wisdom, with freedom. And in time, you begin to trust it. You begin to trust yourself, not the self that needs a name or an achievement, but the deeper presence that watches, feels, learns, and grows. That presence walks the middle way, not because it has figured everything out, but because it is finally willing to walk with open eyes, open hands, and an open heart. As you lay down to rest tonight, let this be your final reflection. You do not need to push, nor do you need to escape. You are allowed to be right here, in the middle, not caught in clinging, not lost in aversion, just here, just breathing, just being. And that, more than anything else, is enough. When you stop chasing the extremes and begin to walk the balanced path, a different kind of vision slowly opens. You begin to see that life doesn't unfold in a straight line. It's not a ladder you climb to some final success. It's more like a rhythm, a returning. The same feelings resurface, the same doubts reappear, the same mistakes sometimes return in new forms. Even after surrender, after awareness, after all the letting go, there are still moments where old habits whisper and the familiar pain knocks at the door again. And you wonder, haven't I already learned this? This is where many lose hope. When they see life circling back to discomfort, they assume they've failed. But this is not failure. This is samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, not only in lifetimes, but within each day, each breath, each relationship. And samsara is not just a prison, it's also a teacher. In Buddhist teachings, samsara is often portrayed as the wheel of suffering. It turns endlessly because of our attachments, our aversions, our ignorance. But seeing samsara only as something to escape misses the deeper opportunity it holds. Because within the turning, within the repetition, is also the chance to wake up, to meet familiar moments not with cynicism or defeat, but with wisdom, to see repetition not as punishment, but as invitation. This is where your relationship to suffering begins to shift. You start to recognize that recurring challenges are not proof that nothing has changed. They are proof that life is giving you another opportunity to meet them differently. What once made you angry now brings understanding. What once overwhelmed you now opens your heart. Not because the world stopped cycling, but because you stopped reacting in the same old way. Samsara is life's way of giving you multiple chances to grow deeper, not just forward. Growth isn't always progress in the way we expect. It often looks like circles, not lines. Because healing is not about never hurting again. It's about becoming more conscious in the midst of the pain, more spacious in the presence of fear, more compassionate in the face of loss. Every time the wheel turns, it asks the same question. How will you respond this time? With the same grasping, the same resistance, the same story, or with a new kind of openness, with presence, with stillness? This is the beginning of transformation, not by avoiding the cycle, but by learning from it. By seeing the recurring patterns in your thoughts, your relationships, your choices, and meeting them without the old armor. No judgment, just deep listening. The beauty of this path is that nothing is wasted. No moment is meaningless. Every return carries wisdom if you are present enough to receive it. That conversation you've had 100 times with yourself, that relationship dynamic you thought you escaped, but now shows up in a new face. These are not signs that you are stuck. They are signs that life is giving you another doorway. This kind of learning is slow. It requires humility. It asks you to stop demanding that life move according to your expectations. It invites you to stop measuring your progress by what has changed on the outside. Because real change often happens invisibly, inside the way you breathe, the way you listen, the way you no longer need to defend your pain. The wheel of samsara does not punish. It mirrors. It reflects back the places you still cling. It reveals the parts of you that still believe happiness must look a certain way. And it gently, or sometimes painfully, brings you back to the same place until you no longer respond with resistance, but with clarity. Accepting samsara as a teacher is not about giving up on liberation. It's about understanding that liberation does not come from leaving life, but from seeing it as it is, fully and without illusion. Even enlightenment is not the escape from the world, it's the transformation of your relationship with it. You begin to see that craving and aversion aren't flaws. They're natural responses from a mind conditioned to survive. But survival and freedom are not the same. Survival clings. Freedom watches, chooses, and lets go. This teaching allows you to be gentle with yourself, because the path is not about walking it perfectly, it's about walking it honestly, with awareness, with the willingness to meet yourself again and again in the same places, and each time soften just a little more. There is something profoundly kind about this perspective. It means that even when you make the same mistake, you are not starting from zero. you are meeting it with slightly more wisdom, more presence, more tenderness. That's how the wheel becomes a spiral instead of a circle. You may pass the same landmarks, but from a higher place each time, with more vision, with less attachment, with a quieter mind. Samsara also teaches impermanence, not just as concept, but as lived truth. The high passes, the low passes, the seasons turn, the roles shift, identities crumble, and through it all, you learn to stop clinging to any one version of yourself or your life. You begin to allow the full experience of being alive, not only the parts that feel good, but the parts that stretch you, break you open, teach you something your comfort never could. Cynicism arises when we forget this, when we see repetition and assume it means meaninglessness, when we see effort and assume it's futile. But the middle way meets samsara without cynicism. It sees the cycle and stays steady. Not expecting perfection, not waiting for escape, just choosing presence over reaction again and again. This is a powerful form of strength, because it means you don't need your life to be different to grow. You don't need every question answered to find peace. You begin to love the very structure of the human experience, the way joy and grief hold hands, the way beauty is born from endings, the way light returns even after long, dark nights. This way of seeing also brings compassion for others. Because once you see your own cycles, your own patterns, your own fears, you recognize them in others. You stop needing people to be perfect. You stop judging them for repeating what they haven't yet learned to face. You stop expecting their pain to resolve on your timeline. You become patient with your own unfolding, with theirs. Because you now understand that awakening isn't a single moment. It's a series of openings, 1,000 soft shifts, a return to the same place with a different heart. Even the teachings, the ones you thought you already understood, will reveal themselves again in new light. A concept you once grasped mentally will suddenly root itself in your body. A line you've heard 100 times will suddenly dissolve some deep layer of fear. This is samsara as teacher. It keeps offering the lesson until you are ready to receive it fully, not just intellectually, but somatically, emotionally, and spiritually. And so, the path becomes less about moving away and more about moving through. You stop trying to escape difficulty and instead meet it with attention. You stop running from the repetition and instead use it as a mirror. You stop resisting what returns and start asking, what is this moment asking of me now? Sometimes what it asks is silence. Sometimes compassion. Sometimes truth spoken clearly. Sometimes stillness. Samsara is not always dramatic. Often it is quiet. It comes in the form of daily life, the frustration at small things, the longing for something more, the fear of what might happen next. But now you meet it not as enemy, but as teacher. There is no need to rush this process, no need to force anything open. Life will offer you all the lessons you need. Your task is to meet them with eyes open and heart soft, to stay curious, to walk slowly, to trust that what repeats does so not to trap you, but to reveal something you haven't yet seen clearly enough to let go. As the cycle continues, as thoughts rise and fall, as emotions bloom and fade, you remain centered, not clinging, not pushing away, just witnessing, just breathing, just allowing the lesson to arrive in its own time. This is where peace lives, not in escape, but in deep engagement without resistance. In meeting each return with a little more love, a little less fear. In walking the same path with greater presence, not because the world has changed, but because you have. And so tonight, let your body rest, not in frustration at the repetition, but in reverence for the journey. Let your thoughts rise and fall without needing them to end. Let your breath move in cycles, as it always does. Inhale, exhale, return. No beginning, no end, only presence. This is samsara, not your prison, your practice, your unfolding, your teacher, and you now are ready to listen. Even as the teachings of samsara help us understand the nature of repeating patterns, there are moments in life that break the cycle not by repetition, but by rupture. Some experiences arrive not to teach gradually, but to split something open inside you so completely that the world will never look the same again. Loss is one of those moments. It doesn't ask your permission. It doesn't wait until you're ready. It comes suddenly or slowly, but always with finality, and in its presence, the mind can no longer pretend to be in control. This is where spiritual teachings are no longer abstract. They either become real or they fall away. Grief is not just a feeling, it is a transformation. It takes what you knew and burns it down. It removes certainty. It questions meaning. It challenges your ideas of permanence, justice, and self. It's not something you move through in a straight line. It moves through you in waves, in silence, in memories, in unexpected moments. And within it, if you allow yourself to stay present, a strange and beautiful truth begins to emerge. You are being asked not to fix anything, but to surrender. Buddhism does not deny the pain of grief. It does not ask you to suppress it or transcend it. What it offers is a way to hold that pain with gentleness without getting lost in the story of resistance. Because the suffering of loss does not come only from what is gone, it comes from the mind's insistence that it should not be this way. The heart breaks, but the mind often breaks it more by refusing to let the experience be what it is. Acceptance in grief is not resignation. It is the willingness to feel deeply without turning away. It is allowing sorrow to be a valid part of life, not a mistake to correct. When someone you love dies, or when a part of your life ends, the emptiness left behind is not something to quickly fill. It is something to enter, to sit with, to honor. The Buddhist view of impermanence, anicca, becomes intensely real during mourning. You begin to see, not just as a concept, but as a living truth, that everything you hold dear is temporary. Every face, every moment, every breath. And while that realization can feel like a wound, it also holds the seed of wisdom, because it invites you to love without clinging, to appreciate without ownership, to hold your relationships, your time, your life with both hands open. In grief, the ego wants to fix, it wants to understand, it wants to know why. But there are no answers that can satisfy the heart in the middle of true loss. What helps is not explanation, but presence. Not solving, but softening. Buddhism teaches that suffering increases when we attach to our version of how things were supposed to be. Letting go of that version, without letting go of love, is the essence of surrender in mourning. This surrender does not mean forgetting. It does not mean moving on. It means fully facing the absence without trying to erase it. It means allowing sadness to be holy, allowing memory to be both comfort and pain. It means crying when you need to, in full awareness, not as a sign of weakness, but as a form of wisdom. Because to feel grief deeply is to acknowledge the depth of your love. And in that recognition, something opens. Buddhist practice offers space for this through mindfulness. Sitting with sorrow does not mean drowning in it. It means allowing it to move through you like weather. Some days, the clouds are heavy. Some days, the sky clears unexpectedly. Your role is not to control the sky. It is to stay present through the changes, not pushing them away and not clinging to them either. The breath becomes a grounding tool. Inhale, you feel the ache. Exhale, you let it be there, again and again. No escape, no denial, just truth, breath by breath. This is the wisdom of grief, not in explanation, but in meeting it fully, moment by moment. There is often guilt in grief. Guilt for not having done more, said more, been more present. Buddhism gently addresses this through the practice of karuna, compassion. It reminds you that the past cannot be changed, but your relationship to it can be softened. Regret is a form of clinging. It tries to rewrite time. But compassion says, I was human. I did the best I could with what I knew, and so did they. This self-compassion is not indulgence. It is necessary. Because only through softening your own heart can you begin to heal. Only through forgiveness of yourself and others can the sharp edges of loss begin to round into remembrance. Over time, pain becomes less sharp, not because it fades, but because your capacity to hold it grows. Buddhism also offers a powerful view of death, not as annihilation, but as transformation. The body dies, the form disappears, but the energy, the connection, the love, the imprint, those continue in ways the rational mind cannot fully grasp. This is not a belief to escape pain. It is an invitation to trust the mystery of life beyond what can be seen. In many traditions, there are rituals of honoring the dead, chanting, offerings, prayers. These are not just cultural habits. They are ways to stay connected without clinging. They create a bridge between love and loss. They allow grief to be expressed, to be shared, to be made sacred. Even in silence, there are ways to honor those who are gone, remembering them with kindness, living in a way they would be proud of, letting their presence shape your choices, not from guilt, but from gratitude. Grief, when held with awareness, transforms into something softer, still painful, but rich with meaning. The Buddhist path also recognizes collective grief, not just the loss of individuals, but the pain of watching the world suffer. This kind of sorrow can feel overwhelming, but it too can be met with presence, with engaged compassion, with action that arises not from panic, but from deep care. There is also grief for what never happened, the future you thought you would have, the version of your life that didn't unfold. This grief is quiet but real, and it deserves your attention. You do not need to justify it. You do not need to hide it. You are allowed to mourn possibilities, even as you learn to accept the life that is. The key is not to rush the process. Grief has its own timeline. It does not follow logic. It will surprise you. It will revisit you when you least expect it. The goal is not to finish grieving. It is to make space for it in your heart without letting it harden you. Some days you will feel peace. Other days the loss will feel fresh again. This is not failure. This is the nature of a heart that still feels. A heart that has not closed itself off. And that openness, even in sorrow, is a sign of deep spiritual strength. When people you love are gone, something of them remains in you, not as an idea, but as presence. The way they shaped your thinking, the way their voice still echoes, the way their love still moves through your decisions. These are not illusions. They are real. They live in the space that memory and awareness create together. Surrender in grief is not giving up on joy. It is making room for joy to return on its own time. It is trusting that the heart can break and heal at the same time. That tears and laughter are not opposites, but companions. Eventually, something shifts. Not dramatically, but gently. You begin to carry the loss instead of being crushed by it. You begin to live not in spite of the pain, but with it, like a scar that no longer bleeds, but still speaks. And in that scar, there is wisdom, there is beauty, there is depth. This is the gift that grief offers when you stop resisting it. It deepens your compassion. It widens your perspective. It strips away what does not matter. And what remains is truth, tenderness, connection. As you close your eyes tonight, you do not need to fix anything. You do not need to feel better. You only need to breathe, to be present with what is here, to know that your sorrow is not a sign of weakness. It is a reflection of your capacity to love, and that in itself is sacred. Let the grief be what it is. Let it change shape. Let it move through, and trust that in your willingness to feel, something in you is being reshaped, not broken, but opened, not lost, but revealed. This is the wisdom of surrender in grief, to stay soft when everything in you wants to close, to remain awake in the dark, and to trust that even in mourning you are being guided home to your deepest self. Grief softens the ground of the heart. It makes you feel exposed, raw, and strangely awake. And once you've walked through that kind of deep sorrow with your eyes still open, you begin to sense something deeper beneath the surface of your pain, something that has always been there, quietly shaping your inner life. It's more than just the sadness of loss. It's the truth that life, by its very nature, is marked by a persistent kind of unease, a friction that never fully disappears. Buddhism calls it dukkha. Dukkha is often translated as suffering, but that word doesn't quite capture its fullness. Dukkha is the dissatisfaction that runs beneath even the most ordinary moments. It's the anxiety in your joy that it might not last. It's the ache of wanting more, even after you've gotten what you thought you wanted. It's the restlessness in your chest, the feeling that something is always just slightly off. It is not a flaw in your life. It is a feature of existence itself. At first, this might sound like a bleak view, but in truth, it's a doorway. Because once you stop expecting life to be free of dukkha, you stop being disappointed every time it arises. You begin to see it not as punishment, but as part of the path. A signal, not a failure. A call to presence, not an indication that something is wrong with you. Dukkha takes many forms. It can be obvious, like heartbreak, illness, or betrayal. Or it can be subtle, like the dissatisfaction you feel after achieving a goal, or the quiet unease that follows a moment of happiness. It's not always about suffering in the dramatic sense. Sometimes it's just the awareness that everything is changing, even the things you wish would stay. The Buddha did not teach the elimination of dukkha by removing all discomfort. He taught the end of suffering through understanding, through a complete, honest, unflinching awareness of what is. The pain does not disappear, but your relationship to it transforms. The way you meet it changes everything. When you treat suffering as a mistake, you close off, you tighten, you fight. But when you see dukkha as an invitation to look deeper, to examine your attachments, your expectations, your ideas of how life should be, you open to growth. That opening is where transformation begins. This is why suffering can become a catalyst, not because it feels good, but because it breaks down the illusions you might otherwise cling to forever. It shatters the belief that you are in control. It questions the story that happiness lies in things always going your way. It exposes the gap between what is real and what is imagined. And in that gap, there is truth. Some of the deepest insights come not through peaceful moments, but through difficulty. When you are forced to sit with discomfort, you begin to see your own mind more clearly. You notice how fast it tries to escape, how quickly it seeks distraction or blame. And then, if you stay present, something shifts. You begin to stop fighting. You begin to listen. You begin to learn. Dukkha can also show you what matters. When things fall apart, the unnecessary falls away. What remains is often the very thing you've been too busy or too afraid to see. The simplicity of being alive, the clarity of breath, the small kindness of another human being, the presence of your own heart, still beating, still here. In this way, suffering becomes not just a teacher, but a purifier. It burns away pretense. It strips down the ego. It removes the layers of illusion that keep you asleep. This is not a process you can control. It is something you survive, then understand, then learn to welcome, not because you enjoy it, but because you know what it can bring. There is also a tendency to compare suffering, to think yours is too small to matter or too large to ever heal. But dukkha is personal and universal at once. It connects us. It is the common thread of all beings, the shared vulnerability of wanting life to be other than it is. And in that shared experience, compassion arises. You start to see yourself in others and others in yourself. Mindfulness teaches you to witness suffering without judgment, to allow it space without collapsing into it. You learn to say, this too is part of life. Not to dismiss it, but to place it within the larger truth of impermanence. Everything arises. Everything passes. Even this. There is a strength that comes from not turning away, from staying with discomfort and seeing what it has to teach, from meeting the pain in your body, the sorrow in your mind, the heaviness in your chest, and greeting it not as enemy, but as messenger. And often the message is this: you are alive, you are still here, you are still capable of feeling even when it hurts. And in that feeling, there is a deep, sacred aliveness, a connection to something beyond comfort, a connection to truth. Dukkha also reveals how tightly you've been holding on, how much you've relied on external conditions for your inner peace. It shows you the places where you've outsourced your happiness. And it invites you, slowly and compassionately, to come back to yourself, to stop chasing, to sit still. This return to self is not self-centered. It's grounding. It brings you back into your own awareness, where you begin to understand that peace is not the absence of pain. It's the presence of acceptance. It's the ability to be fully here with whatever is happening without needing it to be different. Suffering is not something you overcome once and for all. It's something you learn to relate to differently each time it arises. Each wave is new. Each moment requires its own attention. There is no formula. There is only presence. This is why spiritual practice is not about escaping dukkha. It's about deepening your capacity to meet it without fear, without denial, without collapse. You don't become immune to suffering. You become more intimate with it. And through that intimacy, your fear lessens. Your clarity increases. Your compassion expands. Eventually, you may find that dukkha becomes a signal of awakening. When it arises, instead of resisting, you pause, you breathe, you ask what is being revealed. You treat the moment not as a failure, but as a chance to go deeper. Even the body teaches this. Pain in the body draws your attention. It asks you to slow down, to care for yourself, to stop ignoring what needs healing. Emotional pain does the same. It points to something tender, something unresolved. And when met with kindness, that tenderness becomes a doorway. Nothing in Buddhist practice asks you to reject your humanity. On the contrary, it invites you to embrace it fully, to hold your brokenness with as much care as your joy, to stop seeing suffering as a mistake and start seeing it as an essential part of awakening. This shift does not happen overnight. It unfolds gradually as you stay with the practice, as you begin to see that what you once called suffering was not the enemy, it was the path itself, disguised as discomfort. And so tonight, let whatever arises be okay. Let the ache in your chest be allowed. Let the silence speak. Let the restlessness be part of the process. Nothing needs to be fixed before you can rest. You are already on the path. Every breath, every tear, every quiet moment of presence is part of your unfolding. The power of dukkha is not in its intensity. It is in its ability to return you to the present, to wake you from the trance of control, to teach you that what you resist will persist, and what you embrace will begin to transform. Let this truth hold you now. Let it whisper to you in the dark. You do not suffer because you are broken. You suffer because you are human, and your willingness to feel it fully is not a weakness. It is your deepest strength. From this strength, something new begins, not the end of difficulty, but the beginning of intimacy with life itself. After learning to face suffering not as punishment, but as a path, something tender opens in the heart. The hardness begins to soften. There's a deeper willingness to see clearly, to stay present, and to respond with care rather than fear. But the journey doesn't stop with understanding your own pain. That same awareness inevitably brings you closer to the pain of others. And this is where something even more transformative begins. The practice of metta, or loving kindness. Metta is not sentimentality. It's not a feeling you wait to feel. It is an intentional turning of the heart outward again and again, regardless of how you are received. It is love without strings, without demands, without the need for approval or return. In the truest form of this practice, there is surrender, not to weakness, but to the fact that love cannot be controlled. You can care for someone deeply, and they may still walk away. You can show compassion, and it may go unnoticed. You can wish for healing, and the suffering might still remain. Metta is the willingness to keep offering love anyway, not because it changes others, but because it changes you. This practice begins close to home. In traditional teachings, you start with yourself. May I be safe. May I be peaceful. May I be free from suffering. This is not selfish. It is the foundation. Without kindness for yourself, loving others becomes effortful or performative. It becomes entangled with guilt or expectation. But when the heart is softened toward its own wounds, it starts to overflow naturally. From there, you extend this same wish outward. First to someone you love, then to someone neutral, then to someone difficult, eventually to all beings. This is not done to feel spiritually noble. It's done to loosen the mind's habit of separation, to unhook the belief that some deserve compassion and others do not. Metta erodes that wall gently, through repetition, through presence, through surrender. The surrender in loving kindness is the surrender of control over outcomes. You don't get to decide how people receive your care. You don't get to make others understand you. You don't get to guarantee that your efforts will be appreciated. Metta teaches that you love not for effect, but as an expression of your deepest nature. This can feel unnatural at first. So much of love in everyday life is transactional. We offer kindness, hoping it will make others treat us better. We express care because we want to belong. But true, loving kindness asks nothing. It is radiant by itself. It is complete in the giving. This does not mean becoming a martyr. It does not mean tolerating harm. Metta is rooted in wisdom. It sees clearly. It recognizes when boundaries are needed, but it holds those boundaries without hatred. It says no when needed, but without hardening the heart. It remains connected to the truth that even those who hurt others are caught in their own pain. This understanding grows stronger the more you pay attention. As your awareness deepens, you begin to see how often people act from confusion, fear, or deep conditioning. You stop taking things so personally. You see their suffering behind the mask, and while that doesn't excuse harm, it helps you respond without adding more suffering to the cycle. Metta also reveals the impermanence of relationships. People come and go. Emotions rise and fall. Expectations shift. No relationship is guaranteed to last forever. Not because love isn't real, but because life itself is uncertain. The practice invites you to love fully without grasping, to hold others with care, but not possession. This is a radical way of loving in a world that teaches us to attach. It asks you to care deeply while allowing space, to be generous without controlling the narrative, to let others live their journey even when you don't understand it, even when it takes them away from you. It's not easy. You will be tempted to close off, to protect your heart, to decide that love is too risky. But every time you return to the practice, every time you send out goodwill, even through pain, something inside you strengthens, not in a hard way, but in a steady, grounded way. The more you cultivate metta, the more sensitive you become. Not in the sense of being fragile, but in your ability to notice suffering, even when it's hidden. You start to care more, not less. But that care is cleaner. It's not wrapped in the need to fix or be seen. It becomes quiet, constant, and spacious. Loving kindness also helps you face your own imperfections with more grace. You stop needing to be perfect to be worthy of love. You start recognizing the humanity in your own struggles. The practice softens the harsh voice in your head. It replaces criticism with compassion, not so you avoid growth, but so your growth comes from love, not shame. This shift in inner tone changes your outer actions. You speak with more kindness, even in conflict. You listen more deeply, even when you disagree. You forgive more freely, not because you've forgotten, but because you've chosen peace over bitterness. In this way, metta becomes a way of life, not just a meditation. It shapes how you meet strangers, how you navigate difficult moments, how you relate to the world. You begin to see that every person is carrying something heavy, whether or not they show it. You stop needing to prove your point and start wondering what someone else might need. You also become more attuned to small joys. The simple smile of someone passing by, the warmth of sunlight, the quiet of evening. Metta connects you to life in all its forms. It brings reverence to the ordinary. It reminds you that love is not an emotion that comes and goes. It is a quality of presence that you can always choose. There are days when the heart feels closed, when anger, fear, or sorrow make love feel impossible. Those are not failures. They are opportunities. Metta is not about forcing yourself to feel something you don't. It's about choosing to return gently over and over to the intention of care, even when the feeling isn't there, even when the pain is loud. That return, that soft effort, is what transforms. Slowly, without fanfare, the heart opens again. And in that opening, there is space for the full complexity of life, for joy and grief, for hope and disappointment, for connection and loss. Metta does not remove these experiences. It helps you hold them without closing. The surrender in this practice is ongoing. You surrender the need for your love to be seen. You surrender the idea that others must change. You surrender your timeline, your story, your expectations. What remains is presence. What remains is love, undiluted by fear. And in that space, you begin to sense that this love, this intention of goodwill, is not something you create. It's something you return to. It's always been there, covered over by layers of pain, yes, but still intact, still glowing. Metta teaches that underneath all the noise of the world, all the division, all the misunderstanding, there is this shared longing to feel safe, to be held, to be free from suffering. You don't need to agree with someone to wish them well. You don't need to understand them completely. You only need to see them as human, as a being, like you, trying to make their way through an uncertain world. That recognition is powerful. It dissolves walls. It brings warmth where there was distance. It makes space for peace, not just outside of you, but within. So tonight, let your heart rest, not in what it receives, but in what it offers. Let your love be enough, not because it solves every problem, but because it is your deepest truth. Let it flow out silently, like a stream, toward those you love, toward those you struggle with, and yes, toward yourself. There is no need to get it perfect. There is only the practice, the intention, the steady returning to that quiet inner flame that says, "May all beings be well. May they be free. May I walk this life with love no matter what comes." This is the strength of metta, not its power to change others, but its power to change you. And that change, rooted in care, grounded in surrender, is the most transformative power of all. As loving kindness expands through the heart, surrender becomes something more than just a private act of compassion. It starts to show up in the details of daily life. In how you move, how you speak, how you respond to the world around you. This shift is subtle but powerful. It isn't loud or dramatic. It's the kind of quiet strength that changes how you live without needing to change where you live or what you do. And from here, the question naturally arises: what would it mean to live without resistance? Not passively, not with resignation, but to meet life with such openness that you stop pushing against it, stop trying to force every moment into your plans. This is where the Buddhist path meets a principle from another ancient wisdom tradition, the Taoist concept of Wu Wei, non-doing or effortless action. At first, non-doing might sound like withdrawal, but it's not. It's the art of moving in harmony with life instead of trying to control it. And when you bring this into the Buddhist view, it becomes a beautiful expression of surrender. Not the kind of surrender that means stepping away from life, but the kind that allows you to move with the current rather than against it. Resistance shows up in so many ways. The way we tense our bodies in traffic, the way we mentally argue with things we can't change, the way we rush through tasks hoping to arrive somewhere better. And all of it is exhausting. The mind tightens, the body follows, and we lose touch with the calm we're constantly seeking. Non-resistance begins with awareness. You start to notice how often you're pushing against what's already happening. The tension is subtle but constant, a low hum of dissatisfaction. It says, "This isn't how it should be." That voice drives urgency, judgment, and conflict. Wu Wei doesn't tell you to like everything, but it invites you to stop adding friction to what already is. This isn't about giving up your preferences. It's about seeing clearly when your preferences are causing suffering. You can still take action. You can still say no. But the action comes from stillness, not from fear. The response comes from clarity, not control. In Buddhist mindfulness, this shows up as allowing. When discomfort arises, the practice isn't to remove it right away, but to notice it fully, to let it be there without trying to escape. Over time, this teaches the nervous system that it's safe to be with what is. That safety leads to freedom. Effortless action doesn't mean laziness. It means you do what needs to be done without struggle. You wash the dishes while washing the dishes. You speak the truth without performing. You rest when the body calls for it, not out of guilt, but with respect. Wu Wei shows that discipline and surrender are not opposites. They are two expressions of the same awareness. This kind of living honors rhythm over rigidity. You begin to notice that everything in nature follows a rhythm, the seasons, the tides, the breath. Nothing forces itself. Nothing clings. Even growth happens quietly, under the surface, through gentle persistence. You learn to trust those rhythms in yourself. The tension of modern life often comes from ignoring those natural rhythms, from saying yes when we mean no, from overriding tiredness with caffeine and overstimulation, from filling every silence with noise. The practice of non-resistance asks you to stop and feel the actual moment, not the one in your mind, but the one happening right now. When you bring non-resistance into ordinary tasks, something shifts. Waiting in line becomes a moment to breathe. A difficult conversation becomes an invitation to listen. Even failure becomes a teacher instead of a threat. You are no longer measuring everything by its usefulness to your ego. You begin to allow space for things to be as they are. This can be applied to relationships too. Often, we resist not the person, but our ideas about who they should be. We want them to act differently, think differently, meet our expectations. But when we practice Wu Wei in relationships, we begin to meet others with curiosity rather than demand. This doesn't mean allowing disrespect. It means learning to respond rather than react, to speak with intention rather than reflex. In meditation, non-resistance is everything. You sit and the mind wanders. Instead of chasing every thought or judging every distraction, you simply notice and return. That returning, again and again, is the heart of effortless effort. You're not forcing stillness, you're allowing stillness to reveal itself through presence. As this becomes natural, your trust deepens. You start to understand that not everything needs to be fixed. Not every tension requires a solution. Some things resolve on their own when you stop feeding them energy, and some things don't resolve, but they lose their power to control you when you stop resisting them. Wu Wei teaches that the most powerful action is often the gentlest. It's not the push, but the presence. Not the loudest voice, but the most rooted silence. In daily life, this means slowing down enough to feel what is actually needed, rather than rushing to meet artificial goals. Letting go of resistance also reveals where you've been holding unnecessary weight. The pressure to prove, the drive to be ahead, the belief that rest must be earned. These ideas fall away when you realize they're not aligned with the truth of your being. What remains is something more fluid, more natural. Non-resistance doesn't erase pain, but it removes the struggle. You can feel sorrow without being pulled under. You can feel anger without being consumed. You can witness beauty without needing to possess it. This is what it means to live from the middle, where surrender and engagement meet. This way of being is deeply grounded. It doesn't require a change in your environment. It simply asks you to meet your life with a different posture. Less forcing, more listening, less pushing, more flow. And in that flow, wisdom begins to guide your choices. In Taoist thought, water is often the symbol of Wu Wei. Water doesn't resist rocks, it moves around them. It doesn't try to hold its shape, it adapts to its container, but its softness wears down stone over time. This is not weakness, it is the strength of alignment. When you begin to live like this, you become more honest. You stop pretending to be okay when you're not. You stop pretending to have all the answers. There's a new kind of confidence, not in controlling life, but in trusting yourself to meet whatever life brings. And from that place, action becomes clear. Not every action will be easy. Some will still be difficult, but they will be guided by inner stillness, not by panic. They will be chosen from presence, not reaction. This is true power, not in domination, but in alignment with truth. Letting go of resistance also helps you face uncertainty with less fear. You don't need to know every outcome to act. You don't need to predict the future to feel safe. You begin to meet uncertainty as a part of life, not as a threat to be solved. Even creativity benefits from this. Some of the most meaningful insights, expressions, and ideas arise not from effort, but from openness. They come when you stop trying to force them, when you step out of the way, when you allow silence and stillness to guide the flow. This practice also invites greater kindness toward yourself. You stop fighting your own process. You stop judging your pace. You start listening to your needs without shame. You begin to rest more honestly, work more gently, care more deeply. And through all of this, surrender deepens. Not the kind of surrender that withdraws, but the kind that participates fully, without clinging to results. You begin to live in rhythm with your own breath. You begin to notice when something needs effort and when it needs space. When to speak, when to wait, when to move, when to stay. This is not a special state you visit only during retreats or quiet moments. It's a way of being that infuses your ordinary life with clarity, with warmth, with truth. And so, as you come to rest tonight, there's nothing you need to resist. Not your thoughts, not your feelings, not your body, not this moment. Let it all be as it is. Let the tension go. Let the stillness come. This is Wu Wei, not escape, but presence without struggle, action without pressure, being without resistance. And in that being, you return to yourself, effortlessly, completely, now. As non-resistance begins to shape your actions, life feels less like a battle and more like a dance, one where you don't need to control every step to move with grace. But even in this flow, the mind still wanders ahead. It starts scanning the horizon for what could go wrong. It jumps ahead of time, building stories and outcomes before they've had a chance to form. This restlessness is subtle, but it's everywhere. It's the quiet voice that says, "What if?" And underneath that voice is anxiety, not about what is, but about what might be. Anxiety lives in the future. It feeds on uncertainty. It thrives in all the unfinished stories and unanswered questions. And no matter how present you try to be, the mind often pulls you into imagined scenarios where you feel unprepared, unprotected, and alone. Buddhism meets this anxiety not with force, but with truth. Not by promising control over what will happen, but by bringing your full awareness to what is happening now. This is the surrender that goes unnoticed by the world. The quiet, inner decision to release your grip on future outcomes. Not because they don't matter, but because clinging to them creates unnecessary suffering. Worry does not prevent difficulty. It only robs you of the strength and clarity you could be using in the present. Mindfulness is the foundation of this shift. It is not a technique to block thoughts or silence fear. It is the practice of turning your full attention to the moment as it is. When the mind begins spinning into the future, mindfulness doesn't argue. It simply calls you back, to breathe, to sensation, to the next step. This returning is not a one-time act. It is a daily, sometimes hourly, discipline, and each time you come back, the grip of anxiety loosens. Fear of the unknown is natural. The problem is not the fear itself. It's the belief that you must solve what hasn't happened yet, that you must think your way to safety. But the future is not a puzzle you can solve. It is a field you enter, one step at a time, with the tools you build in the present. If your attention is tied up in imagined threats, you miss the strength, insight, and clarity that exist right here. Letting go of future outcomes does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop needing guarantees. You can still plan, still take precautions, still set goals, but you do it without the desperate need for everything to unfold according to your design. The more you practice this, the more you see that life unfolds on its own terms, and that your well-being doesn't depend on predicting or controlling every turn. This surrender also frees you from the weight of perfection. Often, anxiety is tied to the fear of failure, the fear of not living up to some imagined version of success. But Buddhism reminds us, there is no final moment of arrival, no perfect future that erases all discomfort. The goal is not to shape the future into something flawless. It is to meet the future, whatever it brings, with presence and trust. That trust doesn't come from certainty. It comes from experience, from all the moments you feared something and still survived. From all the times life surprised you with strength you didn't know you had. From remembering that the mind exaggerates, repeats, and projects, but that your breath, your body, your awareness can bring you back to what's real. The practice of surrendering future outcomes is also a practice of humility. It means admitting that you don't know, that you can't see every detail, that your view is limited, and that's okay. This kind of humility is not weakness. It's the strength to stay grounded even when clarity is missing. It's the willingness to move forward without guarantees. This is especially powerful during transitions, when life is shifting, when answers are not clear, when outcomes are still forming. The old habits will rise, overthinking, second-guessing, bracing for the worst. But now, instead of feeding them, you return to presence. You bring your mind to the current breath, to the task in front of you, to the sound in the room, and you realize that peace is not in knowing what's coming. It's in knowing that you're here, now, able to meet it. Surrender also helps you respond more wisely to change. Much of our anxiety comes from trying to keep things the same. But everything moves. People change. Circumstances shift. Life evolves. Resistance to that change creates anxiety. But when you surrender to impermanence, you stop fighting the natural flow. You learn to move with life, not against it. This doesn't mean you become passive. It means your energy is no longer drained by fear. You have more space to act clearly, to respond intelligently, to adapt with grace. Anxiety tightens you. Surrender softens you. And in that softness, there is strength. One of the most powerful tools in this process is intention. You can't control outcomes, but you can shape your intentions. You can decide how you want to show up, with integrity, with compassion, with presence. These are not dependent on external results. They are choices you make in the moment, and they create a foundation that holds, no matter what the future brings. This inner alignment becomes your anchor. You may not know what will happen, but you know how you will approach it. And that clarity gives you confidence, not the brittle kind that depends on success, but the quiet confidence of someone who knows they can be steady in the storm. Anxiety also thrives on mental time travel, replaying the past, pre-living the future. Mindfulness interrupts that habit. It trains your attention to return to what you can see, hear, touch, and feel right now. The more you practice this, the more you notice how much time the mind spends outside the present, and the more often you return, the less power those anxious loops have over you. This is not about suppressing thoughts. It's about recognizing that you don't have to believe every projection. The mind imagines danger, but the body knows when you're actually safe. Learning to return to the body grounds you. It shows you what is true right now, not what might happen, but what is happening. Another powerful aspect of surrender is allowing uncertainty to exist without needing to fix it. The human mind wants closure. It wants answers. But some of the most meaningful periods of growth come during times of not knowing, when the path is still forming, when the outcome is not clear. Surrendering to that uncertainty allows space for deeper insight to arise. Often, the answer comes when you stop demanding it, when you create space through stillness, when you stop pushing and start listening. That listening is the essence of surrender. It's a quiet posture of the heart that says, I don't need to force this. I will meet what comes with honesty, with care, and with trust. There is also a kind of beauty in uncertainty. It holds possibility. It means life still has room to surprise you. It keeps the mind humble, the heart curious. You learn to stop rushing toward a finish line that doesn't exist, and instead begin to appreciate the unfolding. Gratitude becomes part of this process. You begin to notice small moments, a kind word, a clear sky, the quiet of early morning. Gratitude brings you back to the present. It reminds you that joy is not only in big achievements, but in simple awareness. Anxiety wants to leap ahead. Gratitude roots you in what is. Over time, the practice of surrendering future outcomes becomes a way of life. You begin to carry a lighter heart. You stop measuring your worth by what happens tomorrow. You stop living as if your happiness is always one achievement away. You begin to trust the rhythm of things, even when you don't understand it. This trust grows stronger, not because life becomes predictable, but because you become more present. You build a steady mind, a gentle heart, a grounded presence, and from there you walk into the unknown, not with fear, but with openness. So tonight, let yourself rest from needing to know. Let the future be what it is, unfinished, uncertain, alive. Come back to this breath, this body, this quiet moment. You don't need to solve everything before sleep. You don't need to predict the path. You only need to be here. This is the gift of surrender. Not a life without challenge, but a life with space, with softness, with freedom from the endless pull of what if. And in that space, peace is not something you chase. It is something you return to again and again. Once the mind begins to surrender its grip on future outcomes, a different kind of openness arises, one that is not rooted in control or self-reliance, but in trust. Not just trust in your ability to meet the moment, but trust in something greater than the limited self. This shift is quiet and profound. It doesn't require belief in dogma or the rejection of reason. It simply asks the heart to open in a new direction toward devotion. In many corners of modern Buddhism, especially as it's taught in the West, devotion can be misunderstood or even dismissed. The focus often remains on mindfulness, meditation, and philosophical clarity. But within the broader tradition, particularly in Vajrayana and Pure Land Buddhism, devotion plays a central role. It is not superstition. It is not blind faith. It is surrender at its most tender and transformative level. Devotion, or bhakti, in the Buddhist context, is the softening of the ego through reverence. It is the act of bowing, not in fear or submission, but in awe, in gratitude, in deep recognition of what lies beyond individual effort. Where mindfulness refines attention, devotion refines the heart. It turns practice from discipline into relationship. This relationship can take many forms. In Vajrayana traditions, it often begins with a connection to a guru or yidam, a personal deity or enlightened being who represents awakened qualities. The practitioner does not worship this figure in a literal sense, but opens to it as a mirror of their own awakened potential. Through mantra, visualization, and offering, the practitioner dissolves the illusion of separateness. The boundary between self and sacred begins to blur. In Pure Land Buddhism, devotion is expressed through faith in Amitabha Buddha, the embodiment of boundless light and compassion. Practitioners chant the name of Amitabha with a heart full of trust, not because they believe in reward, but because this simple act of surrender aligns their minds with something immeasurably vast. It is not about hoping to be saved. It is about remembering the ever-present nature of awakening. What makes devotional surrender so powerful is its emotional honesty. It allows space for helplessness, for longing, for reverence. These are not weaknesses, they are doorways. The moment you allow yourself to kneel, not physically, but inwardly, you step outside the narrow confines of the self. You allow love to move through you, even when you feel broken, uncertain, or small. In a practice world that often emphasizes independence and internal mastery, devotion offers balance. It reminds us that we are not alone, that awakening is not achieved through force of will, but through connection, humility, and grace. It invites the practitioner to shift from "I must attain" to "I open myself to what already is." This doesn't mean giving up responsibility. Devotion is not dependency. It is active participation in a sacred relationship with the Dharma, with the lineage, with the mystery of life itself. You bring your full self to the path, and then you release the outcome into the hands of something greater. This is a different kind of surrender than the one used to quiet anxiety or let go of control. It is a surrender into intimacy, into awe. For some, this relationship is deeply personal. For others, it is expressed through ritual, chanting, and offerings. These acts are not mere tradition, they are containers for the heart. Lighting incense, prostrating, reciting prayers, these are all ways of saying, "I remember what matters." Not with the mind, but with the body, the breath, the intention. In moments of doubt, when mindfulness feels dry or effort feels strained, devotion can carry the practitioner forward. It reminds you that you do not have to feel perfect to belong to this path. You do not have to clear every doubt to feel worthy of love. The very act of turning toward the sacred, even with trembling hands, is enough. Bhakti in Buddhism is not about fantasy. It is grounded in deep awareness. It asks you to engage the world with sincerity, not idealism. To recognize sacredness not only in temples and statues, but in every breath, every relationship, every act of kindness. It opens your perception so that devotion is not something you do, but something you become. And through this becoming, the heart learns to trust not only the present moment, but the unseen, the uncertain, the vast. This trust is not irrational. It is born from direct experience, from the repeated discovery that when the self softens, something luminous appears, something that cannot be explained but can be felt. In Vajrayana, devotion is also tied to the transmission of blessings. When the heart is open, when the practitioner is receptive, the teachings come alive in a different way. Words penetrate deeper. Silence feels more full. Even the simplest instructions hold layers of meaning. This receptivity is not about hierarchy. It is about the inner readiness to receive truth, not as concept, but as direct knowing. The act of surrender in devotion is also an antidote to pride. The ego wants to be the source of all insight. It wants to earn awakening, but the heart knows better. The heart knows that true wisdom is received, not conquered. That transformation is a gift, not a trophy. In Pure Land, the repeated chanting of the Buddha's name, Nembutsu, becomes a path of returning. Every repetition is a reminder. I am held. I am connected. I am not separate from the light I seek. This form of devotion does not erase suffering, but it gives the heart strength to hold it with tenderness. It gives life meaning beyond personal achievement. The paradox is that the more deeply you surrender through devotion, the more grounded you become. You stop floating in abstraction. You become more anchored in ethical action, in compassionate relationship, in present moment awareness. Devotion doesn't pull you away from the world. It roots you in it, with clearer vision and a softer heart. This rootedness shows itself in how you treat others. You begin to see every being as a doorway to the sacred. You stop needing people to match your expectations. You meet them with reverence, not because they're perfect, but because you've trained your heart to bow inwardly to life itself. Devotion also dissolves loneliness. It replaces the cold isolation of ego with the warm connection of spiritual intimacy. You begin to sense that you are not the center of everything, and yet you are fully part of everything. This shift is subtle but life-changing. It replaces fear with trust. It replaces striving with grace. In moments of sorrow, when all the teachings feel far away, devotion is the practice that holds you. You may not be able to meditate. You may not be able to concentrate, but you can still chant. You can still bow. You can still light a candle and whisper the name of what you love. These small acts carry enormous power. They say, I am still here. I still care. I still remember. This kind of remembering is essential, especially in a world that constantly pulls you toward distraction, disconnection, and doubt. Devotion brings you back, again and again, not as an escape, but as a return to what is most real. Whether your path includes formal devotional practices or not, the essence of bhakti can be found in any sincere act of surrender, in the way you listen with your whole heart, in the way you offer help without needing thanks, in the way you let go of outcomes and serve the present moment with love. So as you rest now, there is nothing to solve, no future to shape, no past to regret. Only the breath, the quiet beating of the heart, and the vast space of presence. Let your devotion take the form it wants, whether it's stillness, a whispered prayer, or a feeling of trust with no name. Let your surrender tonight be a gesture of love, a bow not to anyone else, but to the mystery that holds us all. A gesture that says, I am here. I don't need to understand everything. I only need to stay open. This is bhakti, not performance, but presence, not belief, but belonging. And it lives quietly, patiently, inside every breath you take. Devotion opens the heart in ways that no argument ever can. It brings you to your knees, not out of weakness, but through reverence. A soft reverence for life, for truth, for something larger than your personal narrative. But for some, this inner gesture of surrender becomes something greater than a feeling or a practice. It becomes a life path, a path where surrender is not only internal, but also external, where even the structures of everyday life are relinquished, not in rejection, but in devotion to freedom itself. This is the path of monastic renunciation. Monastic life is often misunderstood. From the outside, it can appear as an escape, a retreat from responsibility, a way of avoiding the real world. But within the tradition, renunciation is not about running away. It is about stepping towards something deeper with total clarity. It is a path walked by those who have recognized that true peace does not lie in accumulation or status, that no amount of material comfort can soften the edge of impermanence, that freedom is not something you achieve, it's something you uncover when the distractions fall away. Monastics do not claim superiority. Their robes are not symbols of holiness, but reminders of humility. Every morning they rise, shave their heads, and return to the same basic vows: to live simply, to speak truthfully, to cause no harm, to walk the path with discipline and compassion. These vows are not just moral boundaries, they are structures that hold space for the inner work to flourish. Without the demands of ownership, competition, or reputation, the mind has fewer places to hide. Renunciation begins with the outer form, leaving behind the household life, relinquishing possessions, abstaining from sensual excess. But the real renunciation is internal. It is the gradual letting go of identity, ambition, and the illusion of control. It is learning to rest in not knowing, to sit quietly while the ego dissolves, to meet every moment with presence rather than preference. This stripping down is not meant to create emptiness in the negative sense. It creates space, space for insight, space for compassion, space for the recognition that what you are looking for has never been in the things you chased. In this stillness, something ancient begins to rise, not a belief, not a thought, but a direct knowing that nothing you cling to will last, and that this truth, while difficult, is liberating. Monastics live close to death, not just physically, but psychologically. They contemplate impermanence daily, not out of morbid fascination, but to remember what matters. Every bowl of food is received as a blessing. Every robe sewn is an act of mindfulness. Every breath is a chance to start over. They are not escaping the world. They are studying it more carefully than most ever will. Without distraction, habits become visible. The mind's patterns have nowhere to hide. Fear, desire, irritation, all rise to the surface. And rather than pushing them down, monastics observe them. With patience, with curiosity, with gentleness. This is the training, to sit with what is, again and again, until understanding replaces reaction. Renunciation also fosters interdependence. Monks and nuns do not grow their own food or live in isolation. They rely on lay communities for sustenance, and in return, they offer teachings, presence, and example. This relationship is not transactional. It's symbiotic. The layperson supports the monastic not because they cannot live without them, but because they see the value in someone dedicating their life to understanding the truth. This dynamic shows that renunciation is not only personal, it serves the whole. A monastic life lived with integrity becomes a mirror. It reflects a different possibility. A life not built on ownership, but on clarity. Not on striving, but on stillness. And in a world overwhelmed by consumption and distraction, this reflection is more needed than ever. But renunciation is not just for those who leave home. Its essence can be practiced in any life. The spirit of it lies in choosing simplicity, in releasing what does not serve clarity, in letting go of the inner grasping that says, "I need more." It can be felt when you pause before speaking, when you decide not to react, when you give something away without needing recognition. The heart of renunciation is restraint, not out of repression, but out of wisdom. It is knowing that the pleasure you're chasing may cost you your peace. It is recognizing that not every urge needs to be followed, that not every thought needs to be believed. It is learning to sit with emptiness and not rush to fill it. In Buddhist teachings, renunciation is closely tied to the path of liberation, not because comfort is evil, but because it often becomes a trap. The more we accumulate, the more we fear loss. The more we surround ourselves with stimulation, the more we lose touch with what's underneath. Monastics give up not to suffer, but to see, to hear the silence that noise hides, to feel the spaciousness that clutter blocks. They live with fewer distractions, not because they are stronger, but because they understand their limits. They know the mind will chase endlessly unless it is trained. They know the ego will rebuild itself in 1,000 ways if not watched carefully. This is not weakness. It is discipline. And it is fueled by love, not for the self, but for the truth that lies beyond it. This path also cultivates deep contentment. When you are no longer reaching for more, you begin to appreciate what is. A simple meal, a shared smile, a quiet walk. These become not just enough, they become sacred. And with that appreciation comes joy. Not the kind that depends on external success, but the joy that arises from being in harmony with the truth. Renunciation sharpens gratitude. It turns attention toward what remains when all else is let go. And what remains is the heart, awake, alive, ready to serve, ready to see. This seeing is not about finding something new, it's about uncovering what's been obscured. The teachings point again and again to what's already present: awareness, compassion, freedom. These do not need to be earned, they need to be revealed. And renunciation clears the way. It is not a glamorous path. It requires solitude, discipline, and unwavering honesty. It means facing boredom without escape, sadness without distraction, truth without decoration. But it also means living a life of profound meaning, a life where every step is aligned with awakening, a life where even small moments become pathways to liberation. Monastics surrender not only possessions, but also the idea of being someone special. They become students of the moment. They bow not only to statues, but to reality itself. They embody the truth that freedom does not come from having, it comes from letting go. This kind of surrender is the highest form of commitment. It says, I no longer seek to shape the world to fit my desires. I seek to shape myself to meet the world with wisdom. So, as you rest tonight, consider this question not with pressure, but with openness. What in your life could you release, not out of loss, but out of love for peace? What habit, what belief, what fear no longer serves your clarity? You do not need to shave your head or leave your home. You only need to look honestly, to ask, what would it mean to live more simply, more truthfully, more gently? And from that place of sincerity, surrender becomes not a sacrifice, but a return, not an end, but a beginning, a doorway to the freedom that has always been waiting, not ahead, but right here, in the space you create when you let everything else fall away. After exploring the surrender of worldly attachments through the lens of monastic renunciation, a deeper layer begins to reveal itself, one that reaches into the very heart of spiritual longing. When the robes are worn, the possessions are gone, the silence is deep, and the vows are kept, something else rises quietly in the mind, the desire to awaken. And this longing, though noble and rooted in sincerity, carries its own weight. The path begins to ask not only for the release of external things, but for the surrender of even the deepest spiritual ambition. The desire for enlightenment seems pure. It is what brings many to practice, what motivates countless hours of meditation, study, silence, and service. But over time, that desire can become another attachment, a subtler kind, harder to see because it wears the mask of discipline and devotion. Yet it still pulls the mind forward, away from the present, into an imagined future. It still clings to an outcome, and anything clung to becomes a source of suffering. The paradox of the spiritual path is this: the very longing to awaken can obscure the awakening that is already present. The mind, always grasping for a goal, turns realization into a project. It begins to measure progress, compare experiences, question worthiness. Enlightenment becomes a destination, something just out of reach, something to achieve rather than to uncover. This is not a failure of sincerity. It is simply the way the conditioned mind works. It divides life into now and later, here and there, me and awakening. But true insight does not operate through separation. It arises when the grasping ends, when the need to become is released, when the practitioner stops trying to be anything at all. Letting go of the desire for enlightenment is not the same as giving up the path. It is not resignation. It is clarity. It is the understanding that effort is needed, but craving is not. That you can walk with dedication without reaching forward in desperation. That presence is both the path and the fruit. This shift is quiet. It comes when practice stops being a means to an end and becomes the end itself. When sitting in meditation is no longer a task, but a way of resting in being. When silence is not something to endure, but something to listen to. When the breath is not a doorway to somewhere else, but the place where life already is. Many advanced practitioners speak of a moment when striving falls away, not because they reached the goal, but because they saw that the goal had been imagined, that what they were seeking was never apart from them, that the very effort to grasp had become the last veil. This does not mean that awakening is imaginary. It is real, but it is not separate from this moment. It is not born from accumulation. It is uncovered through subtraction of identity, of expectation, of demand. In Zen, there are countless stories of seekers practicing with intensity for years, only to realize that their very seeking was the final barrier. The moment they gave up, not in defeat, but in deep surrender, clarity emerged. The mountain was always the mountain. The wind was always whispering. The path had never left them. This does not mean discipline is useless. On the contrary, practice refines the heart. It clears the mind. But the intention behind practice must also be purified. If it becomes tainted with ego, with ambition, with spiritual pride, it feeds the very illusions it seeks to dissolve. Letting go of the desire for enlightenment means trusting that the unfolding will happen in its own time. That awakening cannot be forced. That it is more like ripening than construction. You don't make it happen. You stop interfering with what is already true. This surrender can feel disorienting. The mind wants to cling to progress, to identity, to the role of seeker. But awakening asks for the death of all roles, even the role of one who awakens. Because awareness is not personal, it does not belong to you, it simply is. And when the grasping self fades, what remains is simple and vast. The beauty of this surrender is that it frees the practitioner from comparison. No longer bound by others' timelines or teachings, you become intimate with your own direct experience. You stop chasing dramatic insights and begin to value quiet stillness. The sparkle of mystical states fades, and the ordinary becomes radiant, not because it changed, but because you did. Without the pressure to awaken, practice becomes lighter, joyful, grounded. You begin to notice how much peace arises when there's no pressure to become someone. How much clarity arises when there's no story about what should be happening. How much love emerges when there's no self to defend. This surrender also opens the door to humility. You stop needing to prove anything. You stop needing to be seen as wise, advanced, awakened. You let go of subtle arrogance and allow yourself to rest in not knowing, in openness, in beginner's mind. And from that place, the teachings become alive again, fresh, immediate, true. Surrendering the desire for enlightenment is not something you do once. It's something you return to over and over. Each time you notice the mind reaching, grasping, evaluating, you return, not by force, but with a gentle smile, with a breath, with the simple reminder, this is enough. This moment, just as it is. Over time, this changes everything. The path is no longer about escaping life, but embracing it fully. You no longer separate meditation from movement or practice from presence. You stop dividing your experience into sacred and mundane. You begin to see that all of it, the joy, the pain, the stillness, the noise, is part of the same truth. You also begin to see that awakening is not the end. It is the beginning of a deeper engagement with life, of more subtle awareness, of greater compassion. You stop chasing a finish line and begin to serve each moment with integrity, with kindness, with stillness. This kind of surrender requires courage, because it means letting go of every identity, every narrative, even the one that says, I am on the path. But what arises in that space is not emptiness, it is freedom. A freedom so natural and quiet that it cannot be grasped, it can only be lived. So now, in this breath, notice the part of you that is waiting for something more, waiting for a sign, a shift, a breakthrough. And just for a moment, let it rest. Let that part sit down, not because the journey is over, but because you don't need to push anymore. You are not behind, you are not failing, you are not lost. The fact that you are here, listening deeply, is itself the path, and it unfolds not through effort, but through surrender, through allowing the moment to be complete as it is. This is not passive. It is vibrant. It is awake. It is life without resistance, without demand. And in that life, awakening is not something to reach. It is something you recognize when everything else falls away. So rest now, not in seeking, but in seeing, not in effort, but in awareness, not in desire, but in presence. This is where truth lives. Not in the future, but here, always here, quiet, unshaken, complete. Letting go of the desire for enlightenment creates space for something quieter than ambition, subtler than striving. In that soft and spacious letting go, a different kind of clarity begins to emerge. Not the clarity of ideas or conclusions, but the clarity that arrives when everything else has fallen silent, when there is no more to achieve, no more to explain, no more to prove. What remains is silence, not emptiness, but presence without words. In the Buddhist tradition, this is known as Ariya Tunhi, noble silence. Noble silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of depth. It is not withdrawal, but complete engagement with what is, without needing to speak about it. It's a surrender that doesn't declare itself. It doesn't require permission, and it doesn't seek validation. It is the state where insight reveals itself without effort, without argument, and without noise. In a world where everything demands attention, where voices compete to be heard, noble silence feels countercultural. Silence is often mistaken for discomfort, awkwardness, or emptiness. But in the practice of noble silence, silence becomes the doorway to wisdom. It strips away distraction and brings the practitioner into direct contact with experience. In deep meditation, this silence is not something you force. It arises naturally when the mind stops chasing thoughts. When attention no longer clings to the past or projects into the future, silence becomes the natural state. Not something you add, but something you uncover. Beneath every question, every longing, every concept, silence has always been there. This silence is a teacher. It reveals the restlessness of the mind, the compulsive need to narrate every moment, to explain, to fix, to comment. It shows how often language becomes a way to escape what's actually being felt. Through silence, the practitioner learns to stay, to rest in sensation, in breath, in awareness, without reaching for words to cover it. There is profound honesty in this kind of silence. It does not spin stories. It does not flatter or defend. It does not seek agreement. It simply reflects reality as it is, in all its rawness and beauty. In noble silence, there is no place to hide. And paradoxically, in that exposure, there is great safety, because nothing false needs to be maintained. The Buddha himself often remained silent in response to certain metaphysical questions, not because he didn't know the answers, but because he knew those questions came from the mind's desire to grasp, not from the heart's readiness to see. His silence pointed beyond concepts to direct experience. It was an invitation, not a refusal, an offering of deeper truth. Noble silence is not reserved for formal practice. It can live in the middle of daily life. It arises when you choose not to respond in anger, when you listen without interrupting, when you pause before offering your opinion. These moments of silence are not passive. They are active choices to create space for wisdom rather than reactivity. Silence also becomes powerful in relationship. Often, people speak to fill the space between themselves and others, to assert identity, to manage discomfort, to avoid vulnerability. But when silence is held with presence, it becomes connective. It says, "I am here with you," without needing to change or impress you. This kind of silence fosters real intimacy. It also becomes a form of compassion. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can offer someone is your full attention in silence. Not advice, not reassurance, just presence. This presence communicates what no words can. You are not alone. This moment is enough. In retreat settings, silence is often used to deepen practice. For some, it is challenging at first. The mind rebels, the body fidgets, the urge to speak arises. But over time, a different rhythm takes hold. Words lose urgency, thoughts settle. A quiet clarity begins to take shape. In that space, insights arise, not because they are summoned, but because the usual noise has stopped long enough for truth to emerge. Noble silence also reveals the nature of impermanence. You begin to observe sensations rising and passing away, thoughts coming and going, emotions blooming and dissolving. Without the distraction of speech, these patterns become clear, and through this clarity, attachment begins to weaken. In silence, you start to hear what is usually missed: the sound of breath, the beating of the heart, the texture of presence. You notice how much of your internal dialogue is commentary rather than reality. You see how often the mind turns experience into narrative, and in this seeing, something loosens. You stop needing to tell the story. You begin to rest in the experience itself. This silence is not indifferent. It is infused with awareness, with care, with depth. It holds space for grief, for joy, for uncertainty. It does not rush to fix or label. It allows life to be what it is, and in that, allowing, insight deepens. Noble silence also becomes a practice of humility. Speaking often comes from the belief that you must be the one to explain, to teach, to correct. Silence says, maybe truth is deeper than what I can say. Maybe wisdom arises not through expression, but through stillness. This is not silence out of weakness. It is silence out of reverence. There is also discipline in this silence. It requires awareness to choose not to speak when speaking would be easy, to hold your tongue when words would create more confusion, to resist the urge to fill space for the sake of being heard. Each time you choose silence from this place, the mind becomes sharper, the heart more open. This practice is not about silence for silence's sake. It is about creating the conditions for truth to arise naturally, without manipulation, without pressure. It is about trusting that insight does not always need to be found through thought, but through presence. There is also surrender here. Surrender of the self that always wants to be known, understood, validated. In silence, you let that self fall away. You stop trying to explain who you are. You simply are. And in that being, you begin to glimpse what lies beyond personality, beyond history, beyond narrative. This glimpse is not dramatic. It is often subtle, like the stillness at the bottom of a breath. But in that stillness, a different kind of knowing begins to unfold. A knowing that doesn't require words, but lives in the bones, in the breath, in the quiet of being. Over time, noble silence reshapes your relationship with speech. You begin to speak less, but with more intention. You say what is true, what is needed, and nothing more. Your words carry weight because they come from clarity. Your presence becomes fuller because it is no longer scattered across endless noise. You also become more comfortable with uncertainty, with not needing to fill every gap, with not needing to be right. Silence teaches patience, it teaches restraint, it teaches the profound wisdom of waiting for the right moment, and sometimes of letting the moment pass without words at all. So as you sit now, let silence hold you. Let it settle around you like water. Let the thoughts rise and fall without commentary. Let the body rest without demand. Let the breath guide you back, gently, quietly, again and again. This silence is not empty. It is full of life. It is not avoidance. It is attention in its purest form. It does not ask for anything. It offers everything. Let this be the practice, not trying to get somewhere, but resting in what is already here. Not speaking your truth, but listening for it. Not filling the space, but honoring it. In this silence, there is nothing to fix, nothing to chase, nothing to prove. Only this breath, only this awareness, only this deep and sacred surrender. As silence deepens, a kind of inner steadiness begins to emerge. You stop relying on noise to feel real. You stop needing every thought to be spoken, every experience to be named. In this stillness, a question often arises, not loudly, but gently, from the heart. What holds me here? What allows me to keep walking this path with no guarantee, no map, no fixed destination? The answer isn't certainty. It isn't clarity in the way the mind usually demands. What sustains this journey is something far more quiet and essential: faith. Not belief, not blind surrender, but shraddha, a kind of trust that lives at the center of Buddhist practice. Faith in Buddhism is often misunderstood. To many, it seems to conflict with the emphasis on direct experience, on personal inquiry, on seeing things for oneself. But in truth, Buddhist faith is not an escape from doubt. It's what allows you to stay in relationship with the path despite doubt. It is not belief in dogma. It is trust in possibility, trust in the practice, trust in your capacity to awaken, and trust in the basic reliability of cause and effect, of presence, of awareness. This kind of faith is active. It requires discernment. It invites questioning. It grows stronger, not through obedience, but through living the teachings and watching what happens. When the Buddha encouraged faith, it was not so people would follow him blindly. It was so they would walk the path with their own 2 feet, grounded in experience, but open to something deeper than the ego can measure. There is a kind of faith that is fatalistic, passive, and numbing. It says, "Whatever happens is meant to be, so I don't need to engage." But that is not shraddha. That is resignation. Buddhism does not ask you to give up effort. It asks you to give up struggle born from delusion. It teaches you to act clearly, with intention, but without clinging. You're not being asked to stop moving. You're being asked to stop resisting reality. The difference between faith and resignation becomes clear when facing suffering. Resignation says, "This pain is my fate," and shuts down. Faith says, "This pain is part of the path, and I can meet it with wisdom." Resignation collapses into powerlessness. Faith stands up with gentleness and says, "Even now, I trust that something meaningful can emerge." This trust doesn't deny pain, it includes it. It lets suffering be part of the journey without letting it define the whole. Shraddha is the voice inside that says, "Even when I do not know where this leads, I can keep taking the next step." It's the willingness to stay open in uncertainty, to commit to truth even when comfort is not guaranteed. In the early teachings, faith is described as the first spark that inspires one to walk the path. It begins with confidence in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, not as figures or institutions to worship, but as reflections of the possibility within yourself. Faith means trusting that this path, walked with integrity and mindfulness, leads toward peace. But faith is not static. It deepens with practice. Every time you sit through discomfort instead of reacting, faith grows. Every time you tell the truth when it would be easier to hide, faith strengthens. Every moment you pause, listen, and respond with compassion, you are living in faith. Not because you've eliminated fear, but because you're no longer ruled by it. Faith also includes trust in impermanence. Trusting that change is real, that conditions arise and pass, that emotions evolve, and that you are not stuck. This is not abstract philosophy. It is what keeps you from giving up when everything feels heavy. You remember, this too will shift. This too can be met. This trust extends to your own nature. It's the quiet knowing that beneath confusion, craving, and anger, there is clarity, there is kindness, there is freedom. Even when it feels distant, faith reminds you it is not lost. It is obscured, but not gone. Practice is the act of remembering what has been covered. Faith also reshapes how you approach effort. Without faith, effort becomes frantic, perfectionistic, and self-centered. With faith, effort becomes steady, calm, and grounded in love. You stop chasing results. You stop measuring your worth by progress. You work diligently because it is the natural expression of your path, not because you are trying to become someone. This faith is what allows renunciation to feel full rather than empty. You let go not because you must, but because you trust what arises in its place. You stop filling your time, your mind, your relationships with noise, because you begin to believe that what is revealed in silence has value. Faith helps you sit still long enough for insight to rise. Even in community, faith plays a central role. You begin to trust that others too are walking this path with sincerity, that even when others falter, their deepest nature is not lost. Faith keeps your heart open in the face of conflict. It allows forgiveness to bloom. It reminds you that no one is beyond transformation, not even yourself. Faith does not guarantee comfort. In fact, it often leads you straight into discomfort, into the fire of truth. But it is what keeps you from turning away, what keeps you bowing, returning, breathing, staying. What keeps you grounded when the mind wants to escape? This is why surrender is not passive. It is not giving up. It is giving over. Giving over your certainty, your rigidity, your demand for immediate answers. Faith says, I do not know where this leads, but I trust that walking with presence is enough. Over time, faith also teaches you to trust life itself, not as something you control, but as something you can meet. Not as something that must obey your plans, but as something that reflects the deeper rhythms of unfolding. You begin to see that life, like the path, does not always feel clear, but always offers clarity when you meet it fully. Faith is not blind optimism. It is not pretending that everything is okay. It is the ability to stay connected to what matters even when things are not okay. To keep practicing when results are invisible. To keep loving when love is not returned. To keep being honest when no one is watching. This kind of faith nourishes resilience. It keeps you walking through dark nights of doubt. It carries you across the bridges of grief. It helps you return after mistakes, not with shame, but with renewed sincerity. And every return deepens trust, not because you achieved something, but because you didn't give up. Faith also protects against cynicism. In a world that often rewards skepticism, where everything is analyzed and deconstructed, faith allows you to stay soft. It allows you to believe in goodness without needing proof, to trust in peace even in the midst of noise, to live with an open heart without demanding that the world meet your expectations. This softening does not mean naivety. It means courage, to feel, to care, to stay present, to not let the disappointments of the past harden you, to let wonder live alongside wisdom, to let simplicity return even after complexity. Shraddha becomes the ground you rest on when everything else is uncertain. It holds you gently when you fall. It lifts you quietly when you rise. It reminds you that you are not alone on this path, that countless beings have walked it before you, and countless more are walking it now. So now, let this moment be a reflection of that trust. Let the breath be enough. Let the body rest. Let the mind stop striving to understand everything. You don't need to grasp the whole path tonight. You only need to be here. This presence is itself an act of faith. The willingness to stop doing, to stop fixing, to stop performing, and simply remain. In that remaining, something pure and quiet begins to speak. It says, not in words, but in feeling. You are held. You are capable. Keep going. Keep breathing. Keep being. This is what Buddhist trust really means. Not a promise of ease, but a path of depth. Not perfection, but participation. Not escape, but presence. Not passive waiting, but active, courageous surrender. And in this surrender, faith doesn't take you away from life. It brings you deeper into it, fully, freely. Now, faith brings the courage to remain open, even in uncertainty. It teaches you to trust the path, even when progress feels slow or invisible. But as trust deepens, another challenge begins to appear. One that doesn't always look like a challenge at first. It comes softly, wrapped in peaceful language. It mimics surrender. It speaks of letting go and acceptance. But underneath, it hides avoidance. This is where faith can slip into something else, spiritual bypassing. Spiritual bypassing is not a deliberate lie. It's often rooted in sincere longing for peace. But it becomes a problem when the language of practice is used to avoid facing unresolved wounds. Instead of sitting with pain, it skips over it. Instead of listening to difficult emotions, it silences them with quotes. Instead of healing, it hides. And when this happens, what looks like acceptance is often just suppression. True acceptance in Buddhism is courageous. It means meeting every part of your experience, especially the ones that hurt, especially the ones you'd rather not see. It means being honest with your fear, your grief, your shame, not to judge it, not to fix it, but to hold it with awareness. Without that honesty, letting go becomes a spiritual disguise for numbing. You're not releasing attachment, you're avoiding discomfort. This is not what the Buddha taught. The path to liberation moves through suffering, not around it. The first noble truth is not a call to escape pain. It's an invitation to see it clearly. To acknowledge that life includes discomfort, loss, confusion, and longing. Pretending that everything is fine because you're spiritual goes against the core of Buddhist wisdom. Emotional suppression often wears the mask of calm. Someone might seem peaceful on the outside, but inside they're repressing what they truly feel. They've learned to quote teachings about impermanence, non-attachment, and equanimity, but they haven't actually processed the pain in their heart. The result is a kind of disconnect between the outer form of practice and the inner truth of experience. Letting go, in its true form, is not about avoiding. It's about feeling so fully that clinging is no longer needed. You don't bypass anger by denying it. You feel it, understand its roots, and watch it change. You don't bypass grief by labeling it just another arising. You allow it to move through you with tenderness and presence. Many people use meditation as a way to escape. They close their eyes and try to block out everything that's uncomfortable. But real meditation brings everything into view. It shows you what's hidden. It strips away the surface calm and reveals the raw places. And in that revelation, healing becomes possible. Not because you've eliminated your pain, but because you're no longer afraid to face it. There's a difference between observing your emotions and distancing from them to avoid discomfort. Observing means being fully present with the body's response, the breath, the heartbeat, the sensations that come with sadness or anger. Bypassing means watching like a detached observer who refuses to touch anything too painful. One leads to compassion, the other deepens disconnection. Spiritual maturity means learning to be present with the full range of your humanity. It means recognizing that your emotional wounds are not separate from your spiritual path. In fact, they are the path. The places you most want to avoid often contain the exact insight you need to grow. When you tell yourself you've let go of something, ask if you've truly faced it. Not just mentally, but emotionally. Have you allowed your body to feel it? Have you cried when your heart was broken? Have you admitted when you felt powerless, ashamed, or angry? If not, letting go might just be pushing down. And what's pushed down doesn't disappear. It waits. It shows up later in relationships, in habits, in tension, in confusion. The Dharma is not meant to silence your truth. It's meant to illuminate it. If a practice is making you feel numb, if it's creating more distance between you and your emotions, it may be time to pause and look deeper. Are you using the teachings to support healing or to avoid it? True acceptance begins with honesty. You accept where you are, even if where you are is lost, even if it hurts, even if your reaction is messy or your insight feels incomplete. Acceptance does not require you to have it all together. It only requires that you tell the truth. This is not easy. It takes time to unlearn the habit of bypassing, to stop replacing real emotion with spiritual phrases, to let yourself feel vulnerable in a space that may have taught you that vulnerability is a problem to solve rather than a truth to hold. The goal is not to fix your feelings, it's to build a relationship with them. When fear arises, can you meet it with curiosity instead of judgment? When sadness shows up, can you make space for it without needing it to pass quickly? This is real acceptance, not passive, not polished, but deeply human. This kind of emotional work often feels more difficult than traditional meditation, but it's just as necessary. Sitting quietly is only part of the practice. So is learning how to cry without shame, how to name your fear without covering it in doctrine, how to say, "This still hurts," without feeling like you've failed spiritually. When you allow yourself to be fully human, your spiritual practice becomes whole. It's no longer about escape. It's about integration. The teachings come alive, not just in calm moments, but in your deepest struggles. Compassion becomes real. Wisdom becomes embodied. This also changes how you hold space for others. You stop using teachings as shields. You stop offering platitudes when someone is in pain. Instead, you sit with them. You listen. You validate their experience without trying to clean it up. Because now you know, truth does not need to be pretty. It needs to be real. One of the signs of true surrender is emotional honesty. You stop trying to appear wise and start being real. You stop hiding behind practice and let practice support you in facing the hard truths. This is where transformation happens, not in perfect silence, but in raw, honest presence. If you notice bypassing in yourself, there's no need for shame. This path is long. The mind will always try to protect you from pain, but now you see the pattern. Now you have a choice. You can turn toward what's been avoided. You can begin again, not by rejecting the past, but by including it. There is great strength in feeling what you didn't allow yourself to feel before, in grieving what you once thought you had to ignore, in saying, "This matters," even if the world around you says to move on. Your emotions are not mistakes. They are messengers. They are invitations to go deeper. Letting go of spiritual bypassing is not rejecting the teachings. It is honoring them more fully. It is refusing to use the path as a hiding place. It is saying, "My pain deserves the same awareness as my peace." And in that awareness, something begins to shift, something honest, something whole. So rest here now, not in what you wish you felt, but in what is already present. Let the silence hold your truth, not cover it. Let the teachings support your healing, not replace it. Let acceptance be brave, not neat. This is what the heart truly wants, not to escape feeling, but to be met in it, to be held, to be known. And from that knowing, healing can begin. Not as a project, but as a process. Not through suppression, but through compassion. Moment by moment, breath by breath, truth by truth. Once you've seen how spiritual bypassing can quietly take the place of real presence, the path becomes more grounded, more honest. Emotions are no longer enemies. Silence is no longer for show. Your practice becomes real, not because it looks impressive, but because it holds what is raw and alive. From that grounded place, you begin to notice something else. You begin to see the small spaces between things, the in-between moments that pass unnoticed, yet hold immense power. These moments, brief, quiet, and easily dismissed, are invitations. They are not dramatic, but they are sacred. They are where surrender becomes a habit, not a concept. These are the sacred pauses. A sacred pause is the breath before a reaction, the stillness before speech, the moment between thinking and doing. It might last a second or stretch into silence, but its power comes from presence. It's the space that allows wisdom to speak before habit takes over. These moments are so brief that the untrained mind skips them. But when you learn to notice them, they become openings, chances to soften, to let go, to begin again. Most of daily life is shaped by momentum. One thought triggers the next. One task leads to another. One interaction flows into the next without awareness. But this momentum is not neutral. It carries old patterns, reactive energy, and unconscious behavior. A sacred pause interrupts that. It's a simple, deliberate break in the stream of automatic responses. These pauses don't require anything grand. They happen in the checkout line, in traffic, at the sound of a phone ringing. They happen when you're about to defend yourself, about to rush, about to escape discomfort with distraction. In these exact moments, you can stop, not forever, not dramatically, but just long enough to breathe, to return, to choose something different. The power of the pause is not in its length, it's in its clarity. When you pause, you exit the loop of stimulus and reaction. You see more clearly what's moving inside you. You notice the tightness in the body, the pattern of thought, the impulse to speak or withdraw. You don't judge it, you don't analyze it, you just witness it. And in that witnessing, something opens. This opening is where surrender lives. not in big spiritual moments, but in these micro decisions. You feel anger rising, and instead of acting, you pause. You let it pass through like a wave, and in that brief stillness, your response softens. Or you notice the urge to check your phone out of boredom, and instead of reacting, you stay with the boredom. You feel its shape, its edge, its energy, and in that presence, something shifts. These micro-surrenders are not passive. They are powerful choices. To stay instead of escape. To breathe instead of brace. To feel instead of numb. They are the moments that reshape your inner life. Not by force, but by attention. In mindfulness practice, these pauses train the mind to let go of control. They show you that not every impulse needs to be followed, not every emotion needs to be expressed, not every thought needs to be believed. And in the letting go of each small thing, freedom grows. Even speech can be transformed through the sacred pause. Before answering a question, you pause. Before offering advice, you pause. Before saying something you might regret, you pause. These pauses do not create hesitation, they create precision. You speak more clearly, more truthfully, more kindly. You stop using words to control and begin using them to connect. The body also speaks during these moments. In a pause, you may notice tension in your shoulders, tightness in the chest, or restlessness in the legs. Instead of ignoring these signals, you meet them. You breathe into them. You allow them. This brings the body into the practice, reminding you that surrender is not just a mental activity. It is physical, emotional, whole. You may also find that pausing reveals grief, fear, or fatigue that was being buried beneath action. Instead of pushing through, you stop. You acknowledge the truth of what you feel. Even if you can't solve it right away, the act of witnessing it without running brings relief. It brings respect. You are no longer overriding yourself. You are meeting life as it is. These interstitial moments are often missed because the mind is conditioned to look for bigger, louder events. But wisdom is quiet. It moves between breaths, between gestures, between thoughts. When you learn to value these spaces, your life changes. Not outwardly, but inwardly. You become less reactive, more rooted, less scattered, more centered. Pausing also helps break habitual cycles. Emotional patterns often follow predictable scripts. Stress leads to rushing. Sadness leads to withdrawal. Boredom leads to stimulation. But a pause interrupts the script. It invites you to feel instead of flee, to respond instead of react. And over time, those scripts lose their hold. This is especially helpful in relationships. Conflict often escalates because no one pauses. Everyone is speaking, defending, projecting. But one conscious breath can shift the entire dynamic. One person choosing to pause can create the space for empathy, for listening, for peace. The sacred pause also deepens gratitude. When you stop rushing, you notice more. The sound of wind through trees, the warmth of a cup of tea, the tone of a friend's voice. Life becomes less of a blur and more of a presence. You start to see that beauty does not live in events, it lives in attention. You don't need to retreat from the world to access this. You just need to slow down enough to catch the moment before it passes, to listen to the silence behind the noise, to trust that pausing is not wasting time, it is reclaiming it. The practice of pausing is also a way to come back to integrity. When you notice you're out of alignment, rushed, irritable, distracted, you pause. You don't judge. You don't spiral. You simply notice. And in that noticing, you reset. You begin again. These moments become your compass. They help you remember who you are when the mind forgets. They help you return to your values when emotion clouds your view. They help you stay grounded when the world pulls you in every direction. Even endings and beginnings benefit from this. Before closing your laptop, you pause. Before entering your home, you pause. Before starting your next task, you pause. These tiny acts honor transitions. They mark your life with presence. They remind you that every action, no matter how small, can be sacred. The pause is where the sacred enters the ordinary. It is where the spiritual becomes embodied. It is where intention replaces habit. It is where clarity meets compassion. Letting surrender become your practice doesn't mean waiting for dramatic breakthroughs. It means opening to these small moments again and again until they change how you move, how you speak, how you live. So now, rest in one of these sacred pauses. Let this moment be enough. Let your breath guide you back, not to do something, but to feel, not to escape, but to arrive. There is nowhere else you need to be. This is where surrender lives, not in the future, not in theory, but here, in the space between, in the breath before the next thing, in the stillness that reveals what matters most. And every time you remember that, you return, quietly, fully, now. When you begin to honor the sacred pause, you notice that what happens between your actions often carries more weight than the actions themselves. You no longer rush past moments. You allow stillness to shape your attention, and as you become more aware of these spaces, you begin to see that your relationships, those most complex, beautiful, and challenging human connections, are full of these unnoticed spaces too. Between words, glances, and reactions, there are choices. In those quiet gaps, love is either distorted by attachment or clarified by compassion. These micro-moments are where surrender becomes something not only inward, but shared. Relationships are often where spiritual ideas are tested the most. You can sit alone in meditation and feel deeply at peace. But the moment someone misunderstands you, interrupts you, or fails to meet your emotional needs, that calm can vanish. This doesn't mean you've failed. It means relationships are where deep practice lives, not in the absence of friction, but in the way you meet it. Buddhism does not avoid relationships. It doesn't ask you to remove yourself from the world or suppress your need for connection. Instead, it invites you to bring mindfulness and non-attachment into the way you love, communicate, and respond. It helps you understand that conflict, misunderstanding, and emotional pain are not problems to eliminate, but opportunities to awaken. One of the most important shifts is the understanding that attachment is not the same as love. This is difficult, especially in cultures that equate longing and possession with romance. But in the Dharma, true love is not defined by how tightly you hold someone. It is measured by how deeply you understand them and how much freedom and compassion you can bring to the space between you. Attachment says, "You must stay the way I need you to be so I can feel secure." Love says, "I see you as you are and I want your freedom, even if it challenges me. The first is rooted in fear, the second in trust, and moving from one to the other takes practice, presence, and a willingness to surrender the story you've built about what another person should give you. Conflict arises when expectations and assumptions replace real listening. You assume someone should respond the way you would. You project your wounds onto their behavior. You interpret their silence as judgment. But what if conflict was a chance to meet reality more fully, not as a threat, but as a teacher? Buddhist teachings on right speech and right intention provide a foundation for this. Right speech means not just avoiding harm, but speaking with care, at the right time, from the right place in the heart. It means pausing before reacting, choosing words that reflect clarity rather than control. It means knowing when silence is more healing than explanation. Right intention means approaching the relationship not to get something, but to give something: presence, attention, honesty, and patience. You shift from needing others to complete you to choosing to meet them where they are. You learn to see their suffering, their conditioning, their fears, not to excuse harm, but to understand the roots of it. Compassion plays a central role in this shift. It helps you step outside your narrative long enough to consider what another person might be feeling. It helps you recognize that pain often hides behind anger, that defensiveness often masks shame. When you stop taking things personally, you start seeing others more clearly. This doesn't mean allowing yourself to be mistreated. Non-attachment is not passivity. It means setting boundaries without hatred, saying no without blame, ending relationships that harm your peace without needing to villainize anyone. It's possible to walk away in silence and still wish someone well. That is surrender too. True intimacy arises when both people are free, not free from commitment, but free from needing the relationship to look a certain way to feel safe. When both are rooted in presence, there is room for change, for growth, for imperfection. You can disagree without rupture. You can be disappointed without collapsing. You can be real. Relationships also mirror your inner life. They reflect the places you're still reactive, still guarded, still needing validation. But instead of blaming the mirror, you begin to study it. You ask, what is this showing me about my beliefs, my fears, my expectations? And in that reflection, practice deepens. One of the most transformative tools is learning to listen fully, not just to words, but to tone, to breath, to what is not being said. This kind of listening is an act of surrender. You drop your agenda, your need to fix, your readiness to respond. You just receive. And in that receiving, connection is restored. Loving kindness meditation can support this. When you sit with the intention to wish others well, whether they've hurt you, left you, or challenged you, you soften the grip of resentment. You stop needing to be right and start wanting to be free. Forgiveness becomes less about forgetting and more about releasing the need for emotional repayment. Sometimes, the person you need to offer this to is yourself. The harshest conflicts often come from internal patterns projected outward. When you meet yourself with gentleness, you stop demanding perfection from others. When you forgive your own humanness, you forgive theirs. The practice of surrender in relationships is not about staying silent when something hurts. It's about expressing pain without attacking. It's about sharing truth without forcing agreement. It's about remembering that love is not control. It is a field of presence that makes healing possible. Even in moments of rupture, the path remains. You can part ways without bitterness. You can remain kind when someone is unkind. You can let someone go without trying to change their story about you. This is not weakness, it is clarity. Relationships can also become sacred ground for shared practice, sitting together in silence, taking responsibility without shame, learning to return again and again, not to the ideal version of each other, but to the present moment truth. Whether joyful or painful, that return is the essence of connection. There is also surrender in not knowing. You may not understand someone's choices, you may never receive the apology you hoped for, but even here, you can let go of needing closure from the outside. You can offer closure to yourself, not by finishing a story, but by choosing peace within it. Over time, surrender becomes less about the end of conflict and more about the presence you bring into it. You may still get angry, still feel hurt, still speak sharply, but the difference is in your awareness. You catch yourself sooner, you repair with more ease, you love with less grasping, and in all of this, love becomes something more expansive, not a feeling, but a practice, not a dependency, but a devotion to truth. It becomes a space you offer rather than a possession you protect. So let this be the moment you return to that space, where love is not demanded but offered, where silence is not distance but listening, where surrender is not giving up but showing up, fully, honestly, without masks. In the stillness that follows every pause, there is a choice. To meet each other, not with the old story, but with new eyes. To stop repeating the same pain and begin creating new possibility. To hold each other gently, not as possessions, but as fellow travelers walking this difficult, beautiful path. This is the heart of surrender in relationships, not disappearing, not pretending, but being present fully and courageously with whatever is here. And in that presence, love no longer binds, it liberates. As the heart softens in relationships and learns to love without clinging, a deeper strength begins to reveal itself, not the kind that pushes through with force, but the kind that stays with what's difficult without needing to escape. This strength does not draw its power from resistance, but from the willingness to endure with care. It is the quiet resilience of being present through discomfort without shutting down. This is where patience becomes not just a virtue, but a practice of profound spiritual maturity. In the Buddhist tradition, this is known as Kshanti Paramita, the perfection of patience. Kshanti is often misunderstood as waiting quietly, tolerating difficulty, or enduring hardship without complaint. But its true depth is far greater. It is not passive. It is not born from submission or avoidance. It is active presence in the face of challenge. It is a deliberate choice to stay open-hearted when the mind wants to close. It is the acceptance of what is, not with resignation, but with dignity, clarity, and inner peace. Patience, in this sense, is a form of radical acceptance. It is the ability to meet pain, delay, discomfort, or even injustice without losing your stability. It is not about ignoring harm, but about responding to it without hatred. It is not about suppressing emotions, but about creating enough space around them so they don't control your actions. In a world that moves fast, where reactivity is praised and instant gratification is the norm, patience feels unnatural. It asks you to slow down, to breathe through discomfort, to delay judgment. But what it offers is profound. It offers freedom from being ruled by emotion. It offers the strength to carry difficulty without collapsing. It offers the wisdom to wait until clarity arises before acting. There are different layers to Kshanti. One is patience with others, the willingness to hold space for their process, their imperfection, their pain. This does not mean enabling harm. It means not demanding that people move at your pace or meet your needs in ways they cannot. It is seeing the humanity in others, even when they frustrate you, even when they disappoint you. Another layer is patience with circumstances, meeting life as it unfolds, not as you wish it would be. This is especially hard when things feel unfair or slow or unclear. But here, patience becomes surrender in motion. It says, I don't know what will come next, but I will meet it as it comes, without panic. This kind of steadiness becomes an anchor in chaos. And perhaps the most difficult layer is patience with yourself, with your own growth, your own habits, your own healing. The mind wants to rush to be better, to fix everything now. But the path does not unfold on demand. You fall, you repeat old patterns, you forget. Kshanti reminds you that even in this, you are still walking, still learning, still worthy of love. In practice, patience is developed by meeting small moments of discomfort with awareness. When irritation arises in traffic, in conversation, or in silence, you breathe, you stay, you feel the tension without needing to act on it. This strengthens your ability to stay present when bigger challenges arise. You begin to recognize the signs of impatience, tightness in the chest, restlessness in the hands, judgmental thoughts. Instead of reacting, you observe. You let these sensations pass through, knowing they are temporary. This is not repression. It is the conscious choice not to be hijacked by reactivity. Patience also becomes a form of compassion. It says, I will not abandon myself or others just because this is hard. It is an expression of loyalty to truth, to love, to the path. Even when the path feels unclear, you walk it with steady steps. You don't need to know how long it will take. You only need to keep showing up. There is great humility in this. Kshanti is not proud or dramatic. It is quiet, steady, and deeply grounded. It does not seek recognition. It simply holds. It carries. It stays. In the context of Buddhist paramitas, patience is not separate from wisdom or compassion. It is what allows those qualities to manifest under pressure. Without patience, compassion is shallow. Without patience, wisdom becomes brittle. Kshanti holds space for both to grow. This also affects how you handle pain, not just emotional pain, but physical discomfort, mental fatigue, and spiritual doubt. Instead of fighting these states, you learn to meet them with curiosity. You listen. You ask what they are teaching. Often, what feels unbearable softens when it is no longer resisted. Kshanti does not mean you like everything that happens. It means you meet everything that happens with full presence. It means your peace is no longer dependent on comfort or ease. It is rooted in awareness, not in circumstance. There are moments when patience becomes the most radical act. When the world urges you to react, to blame, to shout, to control, choosing to breathe, to stay silent, to listen deeply, is not weakness. It is strength. Not the strength of dominance, but the strength of presence. This presence is not passive. It is alert, awake, responsive. It can say no when needed. It can act when the time is right. But it does so without the poisons of anger, greed, or fear. It acts from clarity, not urgency. Patience is also a form of trust, not blind trust in outcomes, but trust in the process. Trust in the unfolding of things. Trust that what is difficult now may become clear later. Trust that staying present is itself a form of healing. This trust helps you endure not just delays or frustrations, but heartbreak. It helps you grieve without rushing, to feel without fixing, to wait without losing heart. Because some truths are revealed only in stillness. Some healing takes time. Some insight requires deep waiting. In the scriptures, Kshanti is often praised as the most difficult and most beautiful of all perfections, because it holds the heart open when everything in you wants to close. It keeps the fire of awareness alive, even in the coldest moments. It carries the practitioner across the vast landscapes of confusion and suffering with grace. As the world continues to change rapidly, patience becomes a kind of rebellion against haste, against hardness, against the fear that says, if I don't act now, everything will fall apart. Kshanti says, breathe, stay, wait, listen, trust. This does not mean do nothing. It means do the right thing at the right time, without rushing. It means letting wisdom ripen before acting. It means respecting the rhythm of life rather than trying to force it. Even in your own journey, you can stop measuring how far you've come. You can stop comparing. You can stop demanding that your growth follow a timeline. Patience says, each step is sacred. Each moment of awareness counts. Each return to the path matters. So rest now in that knowing. Let this breath be enough. Let this moment hold you. There is no rush, no finish line, just presence, growing deeper with each act of patience. This is not the end of discomfort, but the beginning of peace within it. This is not escape, but true arrival. And in that arrival, you find that the heart does not need to win, control, or fix. It only needs to remain open. Patience is how you stay open. When it's hard, when it's slow, when it's uncertain. And in that staying, something profound begins to bloom, not loudly, but steadily, gracefully, whole. As your body begins to rest and your breath slows, take a moment to let all of this gently settle, not as ideas to memorize, but as truths to live. Through every teaching we've explored, letting go of control, softening attachment, embracing impermanence, staying present in grief, surrendering ambition, allowing silence, trusting without needing to know. We return to the same core truth. Surrender is not weakness. It is the deepest form of wisdom. In surrender, you stop resisting life and start flowing with it. You stop reaching for perfect conditions and begin resting in what already is. You don't escape pain. You meet it with patience, with presence, with love. This is the path, not away from life, but into it, fully, gently, awake. Let these teachings hold you now, like a soft light through the fog. No effort, no grasping, just this breath, this body, this moment. If something in tonight's journey touched you, share it below. What did you feel? What are you surrendering to? Leave a comment with the words, "I choose peace," to honor your own path of letting go. And if this resonated with you, if you found rest in this reflection, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next step on this journey. We're walking this path together, one breath, one truth, one surrender at a time. Sleep well. You are safe. You are seen. You are free to let go.